This boy woke up 26 years in the past. His name was Gray Lee. Once he was a living legend, known as a master swordsman, but everything changed when he was destroyed by his mortal enemy. Gray received the blessing of the Sword of Kronos, the master of time. And then he went back 26 years into the past, to a time when the art of the sword was still primitive. And so, Gray becomes the first genius to completely master swordsmanship, turning into a true monster. A young man breathes heavily, clutching the hilt of his sword. He declares that they've finally made it this far. If they can just defeat this one enemy, they'll win. But an attack suddenly pierces through him. Blood pours from his chest. He looks down, wondering what happened to his body. Then, he finally understands the situation. It was a fatal blow. In the end, he sees his own reflection, and he will die, having accomplished nothing. He opens his eyes one last time. One day, an unknown threat emerged and destroyed an entire continent. Humanity's arch nemesis, the Liquidator. The group created to protect humanity was sent to face it. Among them was Brian Miller, the world's protective shield, who survived a meteorite without a scratch, and also the great sage Bella Albright, with a power said to equal an entire division. There was the divine archer Jacob Bloomfield, who took down a high-level dragon with a single shot, and the sword Saint Amy White, the strongest to have ever lived. And then there was them, the members of the so-called support unit. But the soldier, Gray Lee, knew that in reality, they were just sacrificial pawns. He recognized that those people were on a whole other level. He knew that graduates from the World Union Academy were incredible, but he never imagined the gap between them would be this big. Their combined attacks hit the Liquidator head-on. Lying on the ground, Gray wonders if their presence even matters. He questions if it makes any difference whether the support units are there or not. Meanwhile, he laments that they trained hard too. The enemy takes a hit from the Sword Saint. Then the creature observes the damage to its body. It stares at the heroine, saying she heard it, and that's alright. And then the Liquidator wonders if it should stop messing around. The Liquidator then prepares an area of effect attack, and the blow hits all the heroes at once. It floats victoriously over the fallen bodies. Gray watches the scene from the ground. Then the enemy turns, revealing it was just having fun. He realizes they were all defeated with a single blow, while the opponent claimed it was just having fun until now. The soldier comes to a conclusion. There's absolutely no way they can win this fight, and his body finally gives out. Then, he questions what's happening. He wonders why he's still alive, even after having his heart pierced. A distant voice informs him that it has finally found him. Then another voice summons him, calling him the wielder of a great power. Gray stands up in an unknown place and asks if this is the afterlife, looking a bit barren. He also notices something different. He then asks who the figure sitting on the throne is. The entity informs him that he didn't die, and that his physical wounds have already been healed. The young man stares at it without a word. He looks at his own body and asks if that figure healed him, but the entity denies it, stating that it was Gray's own power. The young man then questions what his own power is. The mysterious figure explains that it cannot give him details, as it's unable to analyze that power correctly, but it assures him that his power is stronger than the Liquidators, if he can control it properly. Gray then asks if that means they can win. The hooded being replies that it doesn't know, but that it also believes they must get rid of the Liquidator, and for that reason, it pierces Gray's chest with its hand. Then it says, "The young man can go now." The entity states that it will lend him its power. Gray wakes up again on the battlefield. A voice then says that this is his power, and not a power that can be seen with the naked eye. Gray moves forward and says he understands, causing the Liquidator to react. He then attacks the enemy with a swift strike. The young man faces the opponent, and the Liquidator is surprised that there's still someone strong left standing. Gray comments that the attack seems to have done some damage. Then he prepares to attack again, and he declares that his power is stronger than the enemy's. But the Liquidator warns him not to be underestimated. The creature blocks the blow with its hand. The young man reacts, surprised by the defense. The Liquidator then congratulates him for forcing it to use its full power. A dark silhouette appears behind the soldier. Gray manifests an even greater power, preparing for the confrontation. The Liquidator questions what that is, as a barrier on its body begins to crack, and it asks if Gray is truly human. The two then charge at each other in a violent clash, and the impact of the collision throws the Liquidator backward. It gets up and asks again if the young man is really human, but Gray replies that's his question. A dark figure glides across the ground at high speed. The Liquidator is surprised he's still alive, but Gray admits the enemy's strength shouldn't be underestimated. He takes a deep breath before continuing. Then Gray declares he'll just crush him over and over until he dies. Then he lunges forward and attacks with his blade. The blow pierces the enemy's body, who calls him a monster, but the Liquidator begins to transform. He takes on a new form and prepares an attack. Under the moon, the creature announces that time is up. Gray is surprised to realize the sky has suddenly turned to night. He faces the enemy, and then he challenges him, asking, "So what?" The young man throws a punch, but his strike is blocked. He reacts to the unexpected block. Then, the liquidator reveals this is just the beginning, and that nothing can harm him in this plane of true twilight. The liquidator orders him to stop his useless resistance and look at the stars. Then he asks if they aren't beautiful. Gray looks up at the sky. A pillar of energy descends toward the ground. The creature moves away from the impact site. The attack creates a gigantic crater in the landscape. He claims the young man won't be able to revive if he's completely pulverized, but the liquidator reacts as a different power manifests. A large clock materializes in front of him. The mysterious voice says the vast amount of power gathered will be enough to take him back. Then the enemy recognizes that power and calls him Kronos. Kronos asks if the wielder of great power can hear him, as he will use all his strength, and he will send him back to the past. The liquidator screams his name. Kronos' voice says this is all he can do for him, as the clock begins to turn. Kronos' voice then entrusts the fate of the world to him. Gray opens his eyes and finds himself lying on a lawn. He sits up and asks where he is. The young man observes the landscape around him. He turns his head to the side and recognizes his hometown, Renato Village. But the village shouldn't be there, as it was destroyed 15 years ago. Then he remembers the words that would send him back to the past and realizes it actually happened. A sudden pain strikes his bandaged arm. He looks at the wound and recalls that back then he was being picked on by Belder and the others. He tells himself he can't let himself be defeated by people like them, but he admits they were strong and he couldn't beat them. Then he sighs, thinking that defeating the liquidator was just a dream. Gray closes his eyes once more. He then remembers that defeating the liquidator was just a dream. So he decides he'll think about how to deal with them when he's stronger, as he doesn't want to get hurt. The young man continues on his way through the forest, but he runs into Belder and his companions. The aggressor says he's been looking for him, and that he's been a lot of trouble. Then he throws a sword on the ground and tells Gray to pick it up. The young man questions him in silence. Belder tells him to stop playing dumb and challenges him to a training battle. Gray refuses the invitation, explaining that his wound isn't fully healed yet, but the bully says not to worry, as the blade is dull and safe. Gray argues that no matter how dull the blade is, it's still a big piece of iron, and that if it hits someone in the wrong place, the result could be serious. Belder slams the sword on the ground and tells him to shut up. He then asks if Gray thinks he has the right to refuse, and advances, saying that if he doesn't like swords, he might as well fight without a weapon. He wonders how this could be a training battle if he was unarmed. Then he recalls the words of a military doctor who explained that his difficulty with the sword was due to a childhood injury, and he realizes that this might have been the start of his life as a loser. One of Belder's companions attacks him, but Gray dodges the blow. The young man reacts to the move he just made. Belder lunges forward with his sword, but he dodges easily. Noticing the opponent's strikes seemed surprisingly slow, his feet move nimbly across the ground. He then realizes that wasn't quite it. Belder gets furious and asks why he can't hit him. The blade passes right by his face, and he understands that he was the one who had actually gotten faster. Belder's companions comment that the way he moves is like he's a completely different person. He kneels before the sword, stating that he may not have the body he used to have, but he still has the memories of the battles he fought. Belder lunges forward with a vertical strike, but Gray parries the attack with his sword. He wonders if he can even fight an amateur like that. Then he remembers that they were the ones who tormented him because he couldn't fight. Gray cracks a smile, and with a single strike, he disarms Belder, stating that things aren't the same anymore. The aggressor curses at him, thinking he doesn't even know how to take a sword strike. But Gray says he doesn't need to worry, as they just taught him a lesson. He holds the sword's hilt with both hands, and states that, as long as the blade is dull, it's perfectly safe to beat someone with it. Belder is surprised by a swift sword strike that flashes past him. He falls to the ground with a cut on his shoulder and wonders what happened. Belder stares straight ahead. Gray Lee stands over the fallen opponent, while 3 other men watch from a distance. Then Gray wonders if the blade wasn't dull. He checks the sword and confirms it's completely dull, thinking Belder would have died if it were sharp. Gray then faces his opponent and hits him in the face with the flat of the blade. The impact throws Belder back, and Gray decides he'll keep the dull sword. In front of Belder, Gray asks him why he's screaming so much. He says someone told him a dull sword was safe. Then Gray asks if he wasn't the one who said that. Back in the present, Belder kneels on the ground, and he yells at his companions to stop staring and attack him. But the men comment that Gray has gotten much stronger and suggest they attack him together from behind. The 3 men rush to attack Gray. He then asks them if they want another round, and Belder screams for his companions to kill him as they charge forward. Gray states that he was going to let it slide, but he's changed his mind. The scene shifts to the forest for a moment, and now the 4 men are kneeling on the ground, all beaten up. Gray stands before them and asks if they're from the Sarya fencing dojo. One of the men confirms, saying they haven't been going lately because they feel strong enough. Gray concludes that while he shouldn't expect much, the dojo might have some use for him. He then asks them to introduce him to the dojo, since entry is by referral only. But Belder asks if he can't ask someone else, as he can't imagine what his master will say. Gray simply raises his sword again, and asks if they should continue what they were doing. Belder immediately agrees to take him and runs off, pointing the way to the dojo. The group walks through the streets of a bustling city. Then Belder asks why he wants to go to a dojo, and Gray questions if the place has a recommendation spot for the academy. Belder confirms he heard something like that, and Gray states that's why he wants to go. One of the men says Gray already seems strong enough without needing to go to the academy. Gray then comments that it would be nice if his current strength were actually enough. He remembers that not even the strongest group in the world was a match for the Liquidator, and even when he used that power, he couldn't even scratch him when he fought seriously. Gray wonders how strong he needs to be to defeat that thing, but he states it's not like there are no clues on how to do it. In that moment, he felt for an instant that he was able to control that dark power. He recalls that what he focused on was the swordsmanship taught by the Swordmaster, the swordsmanship that Amy White taught him. Gray concludes that if he had spent more time training under the same conditions as her, the outcome of that battle might have been different, and he believes that must be why Kronos sent him to this place. Saria questions what they are trying to tell her. She asks if they used what they learned to intimidate a civilian and ended up getting beaten. The instructor of the Saria fencing dojo glares at the group, but Belder tries to justify himself, claiming it was just a training battle. Then, with a swift movement, Saria strikes all 4 men at once. Belder's companions are frozen by her action. She asks him who gave him permission to make excuses and wonders if what she just did was also training. With her sword pointed at his face, Saria orders him to leave and never come back. She then informs them all that from this moment on, they are no longer students of the dojo. They agree and hastily retreat from the premises. Saria turns to Gray and apologizes for the trouble her former students caused. Kneeling, he tells her not to worry and thanks her. Then she changes the subject, mentioning she heard he wanted a recommendation for the academy, and he confirms. As an apology, Saria says she would like to write the letter of recommendation, but she states that first, she needs to confirm his skills, and Gray agrees. Saria offers Gray the first move, telling him to attack when he's ready. He then advances with a rapid sequence of strikes. The two clash in a high-speed exchange of attacks. Saria observes his movements closely. She comments that his swordsmanship is quite practical for his age, as if he's already been through countless battles. Gray is blocked by her sword. Saria dodges his attack and states that Belder and the others were no match for him. She notices his style seems self-taught, but his swordsmanship is similar to that taught at the academy. The instructor continues to block his attacks, noting that he has a lot of talent, but his technique is still crude, and she defines him as a diamond in the rough. Then she decides it's time to end the fight. Saria prepares herself and executes a powerful downward slash. Gray gets ready to block the incoming attack, and the two swords collide with great force. Saria presses the attack, forcing Gray to retreat across the hall. She then finds the situation strange. The instructor wonders why he isn't giving in and is able to keep up with her movements. She questions why she's fighting with all her might, when she just wanted to test his skills. Saria continues to wonder about this feeling. She then asks herself why she is so afraid of this boy. Then Gray leaps and delivers a powerful blow from above, but Saria dodges and comments that despite the bad feeling, it was just a wild swing. After the attack, Gray reveals an opening, and Saria claims that he's finally shown his weakness. She moves in for a counterattack and declares that the fight ends here. The instructor approaches with a determined look, but her expression changes to one of surprise. Saria wonders what just happened. Then she sees her broken wooden sword on the ground. Gray realizes it's the same feeling as before, and that he still has that power. Suddenly, Saria feels an impact coming from his direction. Energy bursts from Gray's leg. She approaches and asks what's wrong and if he's okay. Gray realizes his body couldn't keep up with the power he used, but he struggles to his feet and says he's fine. He can barely stand and thinks he shouldn't use that power carelessly. The young man then considers whether he should tell her what happened. Saria gives him a questioning look, but he decides it's better not to, since she wouldn't believe in something even he can't control. Gray just says he got a little carried away during training. Saria holds her own broken wooden sword, finding it impossible that this could have happened, and she's sure he realizes it too. Gray asks if anything is wrong, but Saria can tell he won't talk about it. So she changes the subject and asks him about wanting a recommendation to the academy. He confirms that he heard she could give him one. Saria says she can certainly recommend him to the best institution in the kingdom, the Royal Fencing Academy, but she states she can't recommend him to go there. The instructor then says he's not suited for that place. Gray looks down. He grips the hilt of his sword, acknowledging his lack of strength. Saria reveals that the place he should go is somewhere else. She suggests the World Union Academy, not the best in the kingdom, but the best institution in the world. The young man reacts with surprise upon hearing the academy's name. He remembers that's where the Sword Saint and other heroes came from. He wonders if someone like him could be accepted there, but concludes it's impossible. Saria then states that he has probably already realized his body is far from suitable for a swordsman. Saria explains that at the Royal Academy, he might get by with his skills, but that wouldn't fly at the World Union Academy. She then questions how he acquired such a technique with such a weak body, and Gray just agrees. He knows everyone at that academy are true monsters, and with a body like his, he wouldn't be able to compete. Then Saria asks why he's giving up, reminding him there are still 9 months until the entrance exam. The young man reacts, saying it's only 9 months. She admits she won't say it's enough time, but Saria asks him to trust her. Then, she asks him if he's ready to suffer for the next 9 months. Gray looks at his own hand and says he doesn't want to suffer, but he clenches his fist and declares he'll do it. The young man then asks her to take care of him for the next 9 months. With a smile, Saria replies that was a great answer. She then cracks her knuckles, ready to start. Gray is startled by her gesture. With a grin, she announces that his hell begins now. The days fly by as Gray undergoes rigorous training. He's forced to eat strange meals and train tirelessly with Saria. The young man pushes forward with determination. 8 months later, Gray appears with a more defined physique. Saria approaches and comments that he's gotten much more muscular. Then, she states she has nothing more to teach him and encourages him to move forward with confidence. He reminds her there's still a month until the exam, but she says it's better to arrive early to get used to the place. The instructor offers him a pouch with money for travel and food. Gray questions if a month isn't too early, refusing to take the money. He then comments that it feels like she's trying to kick him out of the village. Saria just replies that he's overthinking it. Then she reveals she heard an ogre nest was found nearby, and the village has almost no guards. Gray confirms that he also heard about the nest's discovery, but she says it has nothing to do with them, as help will come from the royal capital and there's nothing to worry about. Saria encourages him to go to the exam without any worries, but Gray knows she's lying, and that no help will come to the village. He remembers his master will die trying to face the ogre alone just before the village is destroyed, so he just replies that he understands. The young man takes the pouch of money and thanks her sincerely. With a slight smile, he says his goodbyes and that he's leaving now. Saria watches him leave. Then, she wishes for him to pass the exam. Under the moonlight, the night deepens. In the forest, several skeletons lie among the trees. Saria analyzes the tracks, confirming the scout's report. She follows a blood trail on the path, and states her destination is just ahead. Suddenly, she looks up and asks where he's going. Sitting on a tree branch, Gray calls out to her, "Master." Saria is surprised to see Gray. She then questions why he's there instead of on his way to the academy. He jumps down from the branch and returns the question, reminding her that she had said the royal capital would take care of the ogre nest. Saria explains they couldn't come due to an emergency, so she decided to handle it herself. She confidently states that she's enough, as she knows the nest's strength from the scout's report. The instructor details that the chief is an elite ogre, and the nest holds 40 to 50 monsters, admitting the number of minions will be a bit tricky. Gray knows an elite ogre isn't that strong on its own, but he remembers the creature's true strength lies in its intelligence and leadership, and fighting alone surrounded by so many enemies is suicide. The young man is sure of one thing: if his master goes alone, she won't make it out alive, and the village will be destroyed by the monsters. He saw this future with his own eyes. So, Gray asks her to take him with her. Saria refuses, repeating that she alone will be enough. He insists he doesn't want to miss the chance to gain real combat experience, and asks if she thinks he'll just get in the way. With a smile, she admits that he knows he won't get in the way, as she can no longer beat him even in a sparring match. But Saria warns that no one knows what can happen in a real fight, especially in a monster nest that forms so suddenly. She concludes that for such a dangerous job, it's better for him to wait until he has more real combat experience. Gray realizes she's really insistent on going alone and states that in that case, he has an idea. Saria asks him what this idea might be. He then declares that he'll fight her and knock her unconscious, and then he'll deal with the ogres himself. The two stare each other down for a moment. Gray points his sword at her. Saria then smiles and finally says she gives up, but she asks him to promise her one thing: no matter what. The master demands that he come back alive. Gray states he plans to do just that. He also asks his master not to die, and she agrees as they enter the forest together. The two approach a large ravine where the ogre nest is located. Saria comments that they're quite confident to build a nest in terrain that offers no escape route. Gray points out that they can't escape either, and that it's best to be cautious against intelligent monsters, and Saria agrees. She surveys the terrain ahead. Saria observes that she can't see the chief anywhere, and assumes he's in his tent. suggesting they thin the numbers before he appears. Then, she instructs Gray to eliminate the enemies he can see one by one on his side. The master informs him she'll go from the other side. Gray says he understands, and she approves the plan. Saria gives the signal, and they leap into the camp. An ogre turns around as it notices the movement. Then, Saria charges at it, sword in hand. She cuts off the first enemy's head with a precise strike. A nearby ogre notices the attack. It then alerts the other monsters in the camp. The horde of ogres charges toward the intruders. Gray wields his sword and charges into the crowd of enemies. He cuts down one of the approaching ogres. Gray continues to slash through the ogres rushing at him. Saria also pushes forward, cutting a path through the monsters with her sword. Together, the two fight in sync, taking down the enemies around them. Soon, they stand alone amidst the bodies of the defeated ogres. Saria praises his performance, but he warns her to stay alert, as the battle has only just begun. Then, Gray realizes something is strange about the situation. He notes that the ogres were too weak, which means his master could have defeated them alone, unless the real threat was in that tent up ahead. From the darkness of the main tent, two eyes are watching. An intimidating presence reveals itself in the darkness. Gray feels an overwhelming power coming from that direction. He turns to Saria and yells that they need to get out of there and run, leaving her confused. He then pushes her and insists they just flee immediately. Saria agrees, and the two begin to retreat from the camp. Gray leads the escape, looking back with a tense expression. Suddenly, an elite ogre lands, blocking their escape path. Saria prepares for combat. She then identifies the monster as the elite ogre, believing it to be the nest's chief. But Gray shouts that's not the chief. An even larger creature emerges from the shadows. The new monster lets out a loud roar. The other ogres watch the scene. Saria asks what that creature is. She realizes it's something much stronger than an elite ogre. Gray reveals that it's an ogre general. The monster reveals itself as the true chief of the nest. It sits on a stone throne, watching the two intruders. Saria states that an ogre general is not a monster they can defeat on their own, but she composes herself for the fight. Then, the master charges forward, shouting for them to kill the monster and escape. Saria charges forward and clashes her sword against the ogre general's weapon. Then she focuses for her next move. The master dodges the attack and counters with a sideways strike. She lands a solid hit on the monster, but Saria notices something unexpected. The ogre general's wound begins to heal on its own. Gray understands it's useless, as the general's roar enhances the strength and recovery of its allies. Now, Saria realizes she can barely defeat a single empowered ogre. Even so, Gray manages to land a fatal cut on one of the monsters. He then turns to the general and tells his master that he's leaving his back to her. He asks her to just buy some time, and Saria asks him what he's planning. The young man simply states that there's only one choice, and that choice is to take down the monster that commands all the others. Graylee blocks an ogre's strike with his sword. He finds it annoying when they try to flank him, so he attacks the creature with a spinning slash. One of the ogres charges forward, axe in hand. Gray needs to focus on defeating all the enemies before him. His blade shatters against the monster's body. He realizes his sword can't withstand a strengthened ogre. With a new sword in hand, he parries another attack. Luckily, he had a spare, but he knows it's only a matter of time before it breaks too. Jacob Bloomfield tosses his own sword for Gray to use. Gray catches it mid-air and thanks him. He now has two swords, but they won't be enough for everyone, just for the general and the ogres in his path. He then sheathes the second blade and declares that they are enough. Wielding both swords, the young man charges at the ogre general and his minions. Graylee cuts a path through an ogre, but he's forced to block another's axe. The impact forces him back for a moment. Then he leaps over the horde to strike from above. A mysterious figure watches from afar. The ogre general roars at his troops. Gray is surprised to see the monsters transform. He realizes they've been strengthened even further. An ogre shoves him back during a block. The creature says it saw through his plan. The ogre general admits his intellect isn't just for show. Blades clash in combat. He continues to fight another monster. He carves a path through the creatures and orders them to get out of his way. Gray pushes through the ogre horde. He states he has no time to waste on them as he cuts through the horde. Then, an ogre manages to grab him from behind. Another monster approaches to strike him with an axe. The blow hits him dead on. He realizes they're trying to wear down his swords by throwing themselves at him. One of the creatures charges forward with a raised fist. Gray manages to block the punch with his sword, but the blade shatters from the force of the impact. The force of the blow makes him spit blood. Lying on the ground, he tries to catch his breath. He is now down to his last sword, and he must face hordes of ogres and the general with just one blade. He knows that because of his experience before regressing, he can't win. But in that moment, a new determination arises. He gets up and wields his last sword against the army of monsters. Gray yells for his master to run while the monsters are focused on him. Saria just gives a faint smile in response. She turns to an ogre and says she can't do that. He asks if she plans to die for nothing, but she promises she'll follow him later. Saria denies it with a look and states she can no longer run away. Gray watches the scene hopelessly. He finds himself with no options left and regrets having traveled back in time to defeat the liquidators. He strikes at the approaching ogre, but wonders if it will all end in a place like this. Surrounded, his sword breaks. He holds the broken hilt and states that it's not over yet, and he remembers the power from that time. As long as he can use that power, the fight will go on. He concentrates, certain he can defeat all those enemies. He just needs to remember that moment. He needs to remember the feeling from that time. Clutching the sword's hilt, he maintains his focus. Then, he closes his eyes for an instant. A single eye opens in the darkness. An unknown force completely envelops him, and it materializes into a new sword in his hand. Saria calls out his name. He turns his head to the side. With a smile, he assures her that everything is fine. Then he charges forward and cuts down all the ogres in his path. His new blade destroys the ogre general's axe. The monster looks down at the wound on its chest. Saria watches the scene, not understanding. Saria now faces the remaining ogres alone. She comments that their attack feels light and admits they really gave her a hard time. The warrior defeats the creatures with ease. She then states that without the general to strengthen them, they're nothing. Amidst the fallen monsters, Gray says they somehow made it. Then he apologizes for breaking her sword, but Saria says she doesn't mind since he saved her life. She places her hand on his and starts to ask about the attack he used. Before she can finish her sentence, Gray collapses. Saria then screams his name. Gray wakes up in an unknown place and wonders where he is. He finds himself alone in a vast, dark void before a structure. Before him, a chained door appears. The chains binding the door are suddenly destroyed. Then the door opens, and he questions what it is. He recognizes that power upon seeing an eye emerge from the darkness. Gray then wonders if he'll gain the power if he opens it. He hesitates for a moment. Then he takes a step back. A vision of a skeletal creature assaults him. He decides not to approach the door. He doesn't know why, but he's certain of one thing. And if he opens that door as he is now, he will die. A mysterious voice praises him for his wise decision. Gray's eyes snap open. He wakes up gasping in a bed. Saria approaches and says he's finally awake. He asks where he is, and she explains it's the village infirmary, where he's been unconscious for 5 days. Gray concludes he slept for 5 days because he pushed his body too hard, but Saria doesn't think pushed too hard is the right description for what he did. She then asks if his body is okay and if he can move. He says he'll see, and realizes he can't muster any strength in his right arm, wondering if he'll be able to hold a sword. Additionally, he notices strange marks on his bandaged arm. Saria asks if his arm isn't moving well, and he says he can't put any strength into it. She explains that as she thought, it won't heal anytime soon, as all the bones in his arm are shattered. He's surprised his bones are broken, but comments that he doesn't feel any pain. Saria tells him they treated the wound with a magic potion. Gray is shocked by the cost and asks if it wasn't very expensive. Saria reassures him, telling him not to worry, as the village chief gave them the potion. Gray wonders why the chief would give something so expensive to someone like him. She questions what he's saying. Then, Saria states that he is this village's hero. He is speechless at her declaration. The village chief rushes into the infirmary, calling for Gray. Gray tries to thank him for the magic potion, but the chief says they are the ones who should be thanking him. He explains that it was an ogre general, a monster that not even the forces of neighboring cities could injure. The chief states that if he hadn't killed it, the village would have been destroyed, and adds that if it weren't for him and Saria, the potion, the infirmary, and the villagers wouldn't be here. The two warriors listen to the man's words. Gray replies that he's exaggerating, but the chief insists he's not exaggerating, and that Gray himself should know it. He looks away for a moment. A memory of a burning village confirms that perhaps the chief is right. He remembers that, in the world before his regression, this village was supposed to be destroyed by the ogre attack. The chief says that if he hasn't yet realized the importance of what he did, he can explain in detail, and asks if it's true he'll be taking the exam for the World Union Academy. Gray just listens to the man's question. He realizes he went to kill the ogre a week before the exams, and since he slept for 5 days, he now only has 2 days left. The journey to the academy takes 3 days on foot, but he could get there in a day on horseback if he had the money for it. So he apologizes to the chief and asks if he could lend him a horse. The chief replies that he figured he'd say that, so he prepared the best horse in the village for him in advance. Saria adds that if he hadn't woken up today, they would have taken him there in his sleep. He then opens the door to leave. His eyes adjust to the light outside. As he steps out, he is met by a crowd of villagers waiting for him. They all thank him and wish him luck on his exams. telling him he needs to pass. They continue to thank him for saving the village. One of the villagers approaches and asks Gray to accept a gift. He holds the small pouch and asks what it is. The man explains it's something the whole village contributed to, as they heard the registration for the World Union Academy is expensive. Gray looks at the villagers for a moment, then he smiles and thanks them all. Next to the horse, he tells Saria it'll be hard to come back if he fails, but she reassures him not to worry. She states that none of the candidates at the academy could defeat an ogre general. He worries about the condition of his right arm, but Saria asks if his left one still works fine. Gray clenches his fist and confirms that it does, but he hesitates. She says that's more than enough and that he won't need to use that power either. He still fears the entrance exam won't be lenient enough for him to pass with just one arm. Saria assures him it'll be fine, as the Academy's examiners aren't blind to his skill, and with confidence, she states that he will definitely pass. He thanks her warmly and says that after hearing that, he can't fail now. As he rides away on horseback, he reflects that this village, destroyed in the previous world, still exists here. This world is no longer the same, as the future can be changed, and he will do it with this power. With one last look, he announces his departure. Arriving at his destination, he's thankful he made it in time. He observes the place before him. Then, he spots the enormous structure on the horizon. The World Union Academy finally appears before him. Birds fly over the grand arena. An announcement states that exam tickets will be distributed, and everyone must remain in the central arena. A candidate remarks that everyone here is being tested, but only about 20 of them will pass. Others discuss how the number of successful candidates varies greatly each year, ranging from 50 to just one. Then, a woman is called to present herself before all the candidates. She announces the start of the ticket distribution, asking them to take the paper that will appear in front of each person. With a snap of her fingers, she begins the process. Then, papers begin to materialize in front of each candidate. Gray Lee watches the exam paper appear in his hand. His ticket shows the number 513 for the swordsmanship course, and the woman confirms that everyone has received theirs. The official on the podium warns them not to be surprised that only the number and course are written, as it's like this every year. The woman on the stage gives a slight smile. She continues, stating that the World Union Academy does not discriminate based on age, gender, nationality, or status. The crowd listens intently as she explains there are no other exceptions, and she concludes that not even their names matter. The woman points to the crowd and declares that their names are of no importance whatsoever. She explains that only those who pass the exam and earn the right to cross the bridge will be asked for their names, and even then, they can give a false one if they prefer. Gray Lee questions the system, since his ticket placed him in the swordsmanship course, but his sword was left at the inn. Then, the woman reveals that she assigned the courses based on each person's appearance, and she challenges anyone who was assigned incorrectly to raise their hand. A candidate asks if she's kidding, as it's impossible to have chosen everyone's course just by looking at them. Others in the crowd speculate that they must have been investigated beforehand, or that she used mind-reading magic. The official on the podium notes that no one seems to be in the wrong course, and announces that the exam schedules will now be released. New information appears on Gray Lee's ticket, scheduling his exam for the first day at 11 in the morning. He regrets it being on the first day, as he had hoped for more time for his arm to heal. The woman informs them that the practical exam is a single phase and that being late will result in automatic disqualification. She finishes by saying they do not accommodate personal requests for schedule changes. Gray Lee holds his arm, wishing it would recover at least a little by the next day. The scene shifts to the next day, in front of the arena. He realizes his arm hasn't improved and that he'll have to take the exam like this. An official asks the next candidate to wait at the arena entrance. Gray Lee composes himself, deciding not to be pessimistic about the situation. He moves his hands, confirming his left arm is functional and his right can move a little. Then he decides to use the remaining time to observe the examiner's movements and find an opening. From his position, he watches the fight in the arena as the examiner allows the opponent to make the first move. The candidate in the arena agrees and readies himself. With his sword raised, he charges forward to attack. The candidate's strike is intercepted by the examiner. The examiner stops the attack with his own sword. The candidate declares that it's not over yet. He then applies more force to his attack. The examiner continues to block the blow. The candidate's face is reflected on the examiner's blade. The examiner begins to push the opponent's sword back. In a fluid motion, he deflects the candidate's weapon and prepares a counterattack. The examiner throws the candidate to the ground with a single blow. He then informs him that the exam is over, allowing the young man to grab his weapon and leave. Gray Lee watches the scene unfold. The young man closes his eyes for a moment. Then, the examiner calls for the next candidate, number 513. Gray Lee confirms he is ready for the match. The examiner again allows the candidate to make the first move, and Gray Lee agrees. He grips his sword, preparing for combat. A woman taught him that a sword isn't moved by the arms alone, and he advances. She instructed him to channel the strength of his entire body through his arms. Even with his right arm injured, he prepares to direct the force from his other muscles into the strike. Gray Lee unleashes a sideways strike against the examiner. The strike doesn't go as planned, as moving the sword without arm strength proves to be a great challenge. The examiner barely manages to react in time. Gray Lee wonders as he sees the instructor's sword up close. He realizes the examiner's sword movement is somewhat slow. The young man then advances and attacks the examiner. He notes that the examiner has great power, but his speed and technique are no match for his master's. The young man realizes he can compensate for his lack of arm strength by using the swordsmanship he learned from her. With that in mind, he prepares for his next move. Gray Lee then unleashes a series of rapid strikes. The examiner struggles to block the attacks. The young man realizes his opponent isn't as strong as he had imagined. He remembers his master telling him that he would definitely pass. The two swords clash with force. Gray Lee continues to pressure the examiner during the fight. He believes he can actually win this fight. The combat intensifies with a swift exchange of blows. Gray realizes he has already figured out the examiner's fighting style, but the examiner's sword blade begins to give way. The examiner repels him with a vigorous attack. He concludes the power gap is too great, and it's not easy to win with just one hand. He also notices his opponent's movements are becoming cruder, so the young man decides to risk a move. He dares the examiner to advance. The examiner lunges forward with a wide swing. Gray smiles, seeing the huge opening left by the attack. He dodges the blow and positions himself for a counterattack. Nothing exposes an opening more than a wide swing, and the examiner's attack hits the ground. The young man gets behind his opponent. Gray realizes the power difference doesn't matter. He moves in to strike from behind his opponent. Then, a voice orders the fight to stop. Gray Lee's sword stops inches from the examiner's back. He wonders if the fight is over, thinking it was too soon to stop. An official announces that the time limit for the exam has been reached, and with that, the result is a draw. The young man regrets the outcome, realizing he didn't pass. He tightens his grip on the sword's hilt. Still, he accepts it, knowing he did his best. Walking down the stairs, he reflects that things will be tough if he can't even beat the examiner. He decides he'll have to take the exam again next year when his arm is healed. The young man then turns to the arena and gives thanks. A week passes, showing the Grand Academy building. In meeting room 53 of the World Union Academy, a council is gathered. An older man asks for their opinions on the candidates now that everyone has finished the exam. One of the board members complains of fatigue and suggests splitting the work next year, calling the current method inefficient. But another man argues they can't overlook talent just to make their jobs easier. The meeting leader then asks them to focus on the students, not the system, starting with the swordsmanship course. He projects the results in the room and asks who the successful candidates are. An instructor explains that anyone who defeated the examiner passed, while the others will be judged on the quality they displayed within the time limit. Besides the winners, candidates number 5, 217, and 793 stood out from the rest. One of the counselors suggests keeping only those, as the others wouldn't be able to keep up. No one opposes the decision. The silence in the meeting room confirms the choice. Then, the older man announces that the candidates for the swordsmanship course have been confirmed. A voice in the room asks about candidate number 513. The red-haired woman wants to know what they thought of candidate 515. The examiner who fought Gray Lee gives a smile. Another council member refers to the young candidate as this kid. He comments that it looked like the boy was going to win, but things will be tough if he needs tricks to defeat an examiner. Another instructor concludes that his technique was good, but he lacked strength, and he seemed at a disadvantage from start to finish. The council leader dismisses him, stating that in that case, he's not suitable. The other board members watch the decision with a smile. The red-haired woman prepares to give her opinion. She remarks that so many watched and no one noticed, and if everyone is this blind, perhaps it's a waste to observe together after all. The next day, the city is bustling beneath the Great Clock Tower. Gray Lee's ticket still shows the number 513 for the swordsmanship course. He hears the announcement that the successful candidates will be revealed and that only 6 have passed. Then, he braces himself to hear the result. A candidate's ticket bursts into flames as numbers 5 and 217 are announced. More tickets ignite as numbers 432, 515, 753, and 925 are called. The announcer informs them that these are all 6 candidates accepted for the swordsmanship course. The successful candidates are instructed to cross the bridge and complete their registration by the end of the day. Gray Lee holds his intact ticket, As other candidates celebrate around him, he realizes that after all, he was rejected. A new announcement begins for the Divine Eye's special admission. Candidate number 513 is called, and his ticket manifests. The crowd reacts with surprise upon seeing his ticket. He looks at the ticket and wonders if he passed. Two men in the crowd comment that the Divine Eye's special admission happened again this year. Gray Lee looks confused, as it's the first time he's heard of it. A woman suggests it's just a backdoor entry, and that the academy is in decline. He reflects on the accusation of getting in through the back door. He has no connections and wonders if his master has something to do with it, though she never mentioned anything. An older man scolds the others for bad-mouthing the Divine Eye's special admission. He explains that it's an honorable category that has been producing heroes for over 100 years. The two men scoff, saying the old-timers love this admission, and that it was only impressive back in the day. Someone in the crowd lists recent Divine Admission candidates, including Amy White, Bella Albright, and Jacob Bloomfield. The same person claims they are all complete failures, a fact known even to the current candidates. Images of Amy White and Bella Albright are displayed, and an image of Jacob Bloomfield is also shown. He realizes the three of them were part of the main force against the Liquidator, and now he wonders if his name will be listed alongside theirs. An announcement informs them that the entrance ceremony will begin in 30 minutes, and that everyone should gather in the square in front of the main office. The students then change into their new uniforms, bearing the academy's emblem. Gray Lee walks with the other freshmen toward the meeting place. A student asks if they came to the right place, since there's nothing in the square in front of the main office. Then, a man approaches the group of students and apologizes. He explains there was a small delay in the setup due to some confusion. He asks two students to move aside a bit so he can place the stairs in that spot. Then, he positions himself on the spot and confirms that it's perfect. The two students watch the scene, not understanding what's happening. The man says everything is ready and places his hand on the ground. A large circle forms on the ground from his hand. Structures then begin to rise from the ground. The students react with surprise to the sudden construction. A grand hall with staircases materializes before everyone. The man apologizes for the delay and invites everyone to sit wherever they like. The two students watch the scene, not understanding what happened. One of them asks if that was teleportation magic, surprised that something so large could be moved. Gray Lee sits down, assuming the ceremony is being held here to show off the school building. He then gives a slight smile. Before them, the power of the World Union Academy is revealed. Gray wonders if the number of seats isn't excessive for just 30 accepted students. A nearby student asks if he really doesn't know the reason. The young man apologizes, explaining that he's never studied anything other than how to wield a sword. So, his classmate offers to tell him. She explains that the academy brings together the best students from all over the world, and she points to the sky, saying they are arriving. The young man with the ponytail looks up. The sky fills with approaching airships and dragons. He is amazed by what he sees on the horizon. The enormous airship approaches, and he wonders what it is. Gray Lee recognizes the magic airship as the Strato Queen, which he was on when he was part of the Liquidator subjugation squad. He's surprised to see one of the world's largest airships being used for a simple entrance ceremony. One of the airships lands, demonstrating the power of the World Union Academy. The students from the airships descend toward the ceremony site. On the podium, the man observes that everyone has arrived. Then, he smiles and announces the start of the entrance ceremony. After the director's speech, everyone in the audience applauds. Gray Lee yawns, finding the ceremony not much different from a normal one. An announcement invites the top student from each course, calling up Leonhardt from the swordsmanship course. As he walks up the stairs, students comment that he was the one who defeated the examiner instantly during the exam. Others say that when it comes to swordsmanship, he's as good as any of the teachers. His name is Leonhardt Apius. Gray Lee watches him intently. He turns to the professors and asks if he can speak freely, receiving an affirmative answer. The young man thanks them and prepares to begin his speech. Leonhardt announces that he has a complaint to make to the academy. He addresses his fellow students, or rather, all who were admitted the proper way. With a hand on his chest, he states that it's an honor to be admitted to the academy with the rest of them, and he invites them to work hard together so they can graduate as individuals capable of making significant contributions to the world. He looks forward to the days when they can aim high together as students of the prestigious World Union Academy, but he regrets that among them, there is someone who doesn't deserve to be there, and he directs the question to the Divine Eye, Professor Ariel. The professor replies that all the students there pass the rigorous exam and that while they may not be as strong as him, she doesn't think it's wise to exclude them, and she finishes by asking why he is asking her that question. Leonhardt clarifies that he isn't talking about those who were admitted by properly passing the exams. He continues, referring to the student she admitted through the back door. Then, he mentions her Divine Eye's special admission. He demands that the specially admitted student reveal themselves, return their uniform, and leave the academy immediately. The student audience begins to stir and look around. Gray Lee wonders about all the hostility directed at him. Gray Lee is relieved that Leonhardt doesn't know his face, hoping to avoid involvement if he stays quiet. Professor Ariel comments that this year's new students seem quite lively. Leonhardt states that he is serious and demands she stop admitting students through the back door. Then she approaches and asks if he thinks he is stronger than that boy. The two of them face off on stage in front of the entire academy. Leonhardt reacts with surprise to her question. He composes himself to answer the provocation. Then, he asserts that, of course he is, and questions if she's implying he's wrong. The professor says she likes his attitude and proposes a bet. He questions her proposal, and she simply confirms it. Ariel declares that her position and that boy's admission will be on the line. Gray Lee wonders about the sudden bet. Leonhardt asks if she plans to make him fight the special student, but she denies it, saying she wouldn't do something so crude. She explains that if the boy went all out, Leonhardt would end up dead. As an educator, she can't risk her students' lives. He asks if she's provoking him. Ariel states she's serious and suggests they make the bet about monsters to be safer. She adds that he's much better at fighting monsters than humans, and he acknowledges she's well informed. Then, the young man asks what the bet is exactly. She replies that it's simple. They just have to kill the monsters she chooses as targets. With each round, the target monster will get stronger, and the first one who fails to defeat their monster loses. If the special student loses, she will retire from her teaching position, and all special admission students will be expelled. But if Leonhardt loses, he'll have to do whatever she says. She then faces him and asks what he thinks of the proposal. He asks to know the target monsters first. Although he's confident he can handle any opponent, he'd rather not get caught in a strange trap. The professor reflects for a moment and prepares to announce the first target. The professor suggests an ogre general as the first target, and she asks if that would be too easy for him. The other students in the audience react with surprise to the choice. Gray Lee wonders why she specifically chose that monster. Leonhardt slams his fist on the podium. He states that an ogre general isn't a monster someone can kill alone. Ariel says she's not asking him to kill one immediately, and suggests a one-year deadline. He retorts that if someone could defeat a disaster-level monster with just a year of training, people wouldn't be suffering, and asks for a more realistic target. Gray Lee watches the discussion intently. Then, he smiles as he understands the situation. Leonhardt accuses her of deliberately choosing a monster no one can defeat, so there won't be a clear winner, and refuses to agree. Then, Ariel adds one more condition, stating that if it's a draw, he wins. She explains that if the boy fails to defeat the ogre general, she will be fired and all special students will be expelled. The professor confirms the proposal with a nod. Leonhardt questions her sanity, feeling that the outcome of the bet is already decided. The professor asks if he has any more objections. Leonhardt specifies that it can't be an ogre general that has already been weakened. She agrees, saying, of course not. Then, the professor materializes a quill and a contract. She informs him that the details are already written on the magic contract, and that he can sign if he has no issues. The young man observes the contract floating in front of him. Then, he accepts the bet and signs the document. Leonhardt asks if she truly believes that boy can win, but she just replies, who knows? The professor turns and walks away from the podium. The other professors comment, wondering if she isn't using the bet as an excuse to retire. One of them mentions that she's past her prime after all. Gray Lee watches the situation, realizing the bet is now official. He then wonders if the monster he defeated before enrolling would be included in the one-year deadline. Professor Ariel looks in his direction. The young man realizes the bet was already won from the moment it began. The professor makes a silencing gesture at Gray Lee, who concludes that she plays dirty. A professor holding a book announces the start of the class on the fundamentals of magic. He acknowledges that some might be surprised by a class on the first day, but as academy students, they can't waste a single day. The professor then starts with the basics, explaining how to use magic. He teaches that within our bodies exists an invisible energy called ether, which can be manipulated through magic circuits. The class watches the professor's demonstration intently. Gray Lee feels relieved that he can follow the lecture, as he heard the same explanations at the training camp. Then, he realizes what his real problem is, the fact that he ended up in the same class as Leonhardt. He hopes that no one finds out he is the special admission student of the Divine Eye. The professor calls out a student who looks bored. He scolds him for already looking away less than 5 minutes into the class. Gray apologizes, surprised to have been noticed even though he's at the back of the room. The professor holds up the book and challenges him to show his knowledge to the class, since he seems so confident, and he asks if the young man is capable of using basic magic. Gray Lee argues that, with all due respect, he thought it would be fine if he didn't know how to use magic, since they're in the swordsmanship course. But the professor explains that even if he can only use a sword, he needs to know the basics to coordinate with a mage in a real fight. He realizes even the explanation is the same as the training camps, and wonders if the spell they're going to learn will also be the same. The young man then asks if the spell they'll be learning is the ether projectile. The professor confirms, asking if he knows how to use it, and Gray replies that he does. He feels relieved, realizing the hellish training camp wasn't in vain. The professor decides to take this opportunity for a match and asks Leonhardt if he can also use the ether projectile. He replies that of course he can. Leonhardt adds that he was trained not only in swordsmanship, but also in magic even before starting school, and questions if it isn't risky to pit him against the other student. The professor reassures him, saying he doesn't need to hold back. Regardless of the skill gap, they'll only use the ether projectile, and no one will die. Then he reveals that young Gray is this year's Divine Eye student, leaving Leonhardt surprised by the information. Everyone in the classroom turns to look at Gray. He's shocked by the sudden revelation, and the professor simply smiles, having just spilled the beans. Leonhardt decides he needs to show Gray how things work. He states that he's going to show him what kind of place the academy is. Then, he orders the young man to come down for the confrontation. Gray Lee reacts to the challenge. The professor instructs them both to fire their ether projectiles at their opponents on his signal. Gray braces himself, aware that he's only spent a few days learning magic and might not come out of this unscathed. As the fight begins, Leonhardt prepares his attack to show the difference in strength between them. Gray Lee also focuses his energy, feeling he has no other choice. He decides to go all out. Then, the young man fires a large sphere of energy toward his opponent. Both students are surprised by the spell's result. The young man recovers and assures him he's fine, to the older man's relief. He silently watches the student compose himself. The professor analyzes the destruction, realizing the barrier barely managed to contain the impact. He then turns to Gray Lee, asking how he conjured such a powerful ether projectile. Gray Lee looks at his own hand and wonders aloud what he just did. He recognizes the spell was weak and different from what he was used to. Then he wonders if the subjugation squad's ether projectile is different from the one taught at the academy. The young man asks if he used the wrong spell, but the professor confirms it was an ether projectile. But he explains that the quality was different, as it wasn't ordinary ether. It was super compressed ether. Gray Lee states he's never heard of it. The professor reveals it's a power that not even the instructors can easily replicate. The other students comment on the Divine Eye's admission and say he should be in the magic course, but the young man knows that's not the real explanation. He remembers that all the subjugation squad's spells were like this, and that he had no aptitude for them. Gray Lee questions the professor while casting a spell, claiming that anyone could do it with practice. The professor just starts to smile at the comment. The young man watches his reaction, confused. Then the older man begins to laugh openly. The professor's reaction leaves him completely baffled. He approaches and suggests the student transfer to the magic course, as he has more talent for it than for swordsmanship. But Gray Lee refuses the offer, explaining that he's been told before he wasn't good with magic. The professor counters, stating he's a prodigy for being able to use the ether compression technique at his age. He insists that whoever evaluated him knew nothing, and asks him again to transfer to the magic course. The other students watch the scene, surprised to see such a strict professor praise someone that way. The older man points at the young man and says it would be a crime against magic if he didn't follow this path. The young man responds with a restrained smile, but the term ether compression technique reminds him of something from his past. A teacher explains on a blackboard that in the old days people didn't know about life force, and because of that it was very difficult for them to cast magic properly. In his memory, a woman explained that one had to compress the ether and use only the parts that mixed with odd. She then comments that, looking back, it was all rather funny. Back in the present, Gray Lee asks the professor if he knows about odd. The older man is confused and asks what that is. From his reaction, the young man confirms that the world doesn't yet know about the existence of OD. Then he questions what he learned in the subjugation squad. The young man realizes all his knowledge came from the future. The professor interrupts him, insisting he transfer to the magic course, while Gray Lee decides he needs to be careful about who he shares his secret with. But the young man refuses the offer, explaining that he loves swords, though he appreciates the proposal. The older man laments, saying there's nothing to be done if that's how he feels, but he instructs him to seek him out any time if he changes his mind. Gray Lee thanks him again for the offer. The professor sends him back to his seat, allowing him to leave the class if he gets bored. He states that this lecture is too basic for the students' level. The other students watch, impressed by the high regard Professor Carlos has for him. Gray Lee starts walking back to his seat in the amphitheater. Leonhardt turns to him and calls him Lord Gray. A sudden chill runs down the young man's spine. Later, he reads a note from Professor Ariel, summoning him to her office. Walking down the hall, he wonders aloud about the reason for the sudden summons. The young man then assumes Professor Carlos might be behind it. He finally arrives at a large, ornate door. A voice from inside asks if he is Gray, and says the door is open. He begins to enter the room, announcing himself. Suddenly, a blade lunges towards him. The young man reacts by drawing his sword. With a swift movement, he manages to block the surprise attack. The figure inside the room watches him. Gray Lee then states that his body reacted on its own. With his sword in hand, Gray Lee questions the girl on the floor about the reason for the attack. Gray Lee holds his ground, staring at the girl on the floor. He watches her for a moment. Then the young woman gets up, and he stares at her. He gets the feeling he's seen her somewhere before. Across the room, Professor Ariel remarks that he wasn't bad at all. She then states that her eyes didn't deceive her. One of the men asks if Bella didn't go easy on him, since her movements were perfect, but getting disarmed was strange. Hearing the name, Gray Lee confirms that she is Bella Albright. He recognizes her as the sorceress. Professor Ariel turns to the other two and asks if they should quit their teaching jobs. One of them quickly says it was just a joke. Then he admits he has no choice, tossing a few coins. Gray Lee asks what the professors are doing. The woman reveals they were betting on whether he could defend himself from the surprise attack, and thanks to him, she won a good amount of money. She then tosses him a part of the winnings. Gray Lee looks at the gold coin in his hand, wondering if it isn't worth a fortune. One of the professors comments that even so, the situation was exactly as the other had said. The focus remains on the professor's conversation. He observes that during the fight, it seemed like the boy intentionally didn't use his dominant arm. It was as if he were trying to protect his unmoving arm. The other man asks if it was because of an injury. The professor speculates it's not an apparent physical injury, but a deeper kind of wound. The other agrees, saying a simple injury wouldn't cause that. Gray Lee asks how they can notice all that just by watching. One of them explains they wouldn't be professors if they couldn't spot such details, but Professor Ariel already knew since the exam. Ariel then asks them to leave, stating she won't give up on her student. The two men admit the boy has potential, at least for now, but one of them warns him that if that wound doesn't heal, he won't meet the Academy's admission standards. He then tells the young man to keep that in mind. Professor Ariel watches the two leave before turning back to Gray Lee. Gray Lee watches in silence, waiting for the professor to speak. Professor Ariel says that now that the others are gone, they can talk about magic. On the table, a tea set is already served. She reveals she heard about his use of super compressed ether in class, and he confirms that she's already aware. Ariel says that Professor Carlos came to her office to request his transfer to the magic course, but she refused. As she stirs her cup, she stares at him. To her, the young man is better suited to wielding a sword than using magic. The professor states that he doesn't seem good at magic compression, nor does he show any signs of having practiced the technique. The boy brings the cup to his lips, deciding it's better not to lie. He then agrees, saying it's exactly as she said. Ariel asks him to reveal the trick he used, promising secrecy and even a reward. She places a hand on Bella's shoulder and insists she needs to know for the girl's sake. Gray Lee asks if it's for Bella, almost calling her by her title of sorceress. The professor confirms, explaining that Bella is a genius in magic theory, but terrible at its application. She concludes by saying that for some reason, the young woman can't use the compression technique to create super compressed ether. Gray Lee comments that he heard Bella Albright was a late bloomer, and now he understands why. But Professor Ariel points out that, according to Carlos, he didn't seem to be compressing the ether when he used the technique. Ariel adds that if he helps, Bella won't have to be sent to Professor Bradley. The boy repeats the name Professor Bradley in a low voice. He then asks if she's referring to Professor Varian Bradley. The professor confirms and realizes he already knows him. Gray Lee explains it's impossible not to know him, as he's infamous for his countless human experiments. He remembers that the professor murdered many in the process and caused magical disasters. These disasters resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people. The boy calls him the worst magical criminal in history. Then he realizes that in this era, Bradley hasn't been captured yet. Ariel reveals that if Bella can't create super compressed ether by the end of the year, she'll be sent to him for surgery. Gray Lee asks her if that isn't a terrible idea. The professor confirms, explaining the surgery is actually a pretext for human experimentation. She adds that, although it's not public knowledge, there are rumors that many of his test subjects have died or been broken. Bella Albright admits that, despite the danger, she'll be expelled at the end of the year if she can't use super compressed ether. Professor Ariel replies that she'd rather have her drop out of the academy than let that man tamper with her body. Gray Lee reflects that his knowledge of magic doesn't belong to this era, and revealing it could alter history. The young woman clenches her fists in her lap. He continues to watch them in silence. A brief memory of a sinister figure and his own suffering flashes through his mind. Another memory of a chaotic battle hits him. Then he decides that the future he knows deserves to be changed. The boy places his hand on his cup and states that he understands the situation. He offers to teach her. Gray Lee promises to show her how to use super compressed ether as he conjures a sphere of energy. Sometime later, they are gathered in a large arena. He uses a blackboard to explain the fundamentals. When he finishes, he says he's shared all his knowledge and asks them not to tell anyone. Professor Ariel assures him the secret is safe, as the magic contract they signed would kill them if they broke it. Gray turns to them and asks what they thought of his explanation. Professor Ariel admits that the knowledge he revealed goes far beyond what she imagined. Then Bella adds that the explanation was so well organized, it felt like a lecture from hundreds of years in the future. She claims that just hearing his theory has advanced the history of magic by a century. The boy reflects that this was her lecture from 10 years in the future, so to someone today, it would sound like a 100-year advancement. Professor Ariel admits she couldn't judge all the information and asks Bella if she believes it. The young woman replies that there's a good chance the theory is correct, as nothing contradicts current magical knowledge. She then concludes that the fastest way to find out the truth is by testing it. Bella holds a leaf and tells Gray that if everything he said is true, the spell should work. She concentrates and states that, according to his theory, this is her full strength. With her staff in hand, the young woman casts a spell. Gray questions her, remembering that her full power was capable of burning down an entire city. As an enormous energy is released, he recalls how she couldn't control her power. Bella herself watches the result, not understanding. The boy yells as the energy dissipates. Gray shields himself from the immense wave of power unleashed by Bella. He realizes he would have been killed if she hadn't controlled the magic at the last second. The flames diverted from him at the exact moment, saving his life. Bella celebrates, having successfully controlled the spell. The fire then begins to churn and take a new form. Before her, the flames morph into a gigantic dragon. She watches the creature, exclaiming how much fun this is, but her control over the magic begins to waver. She warns that her ether has run out and collapses to the ground. Gray rushes to catch her as Professor Ariel approaches. The professor explains that she's just fallen asleep from exhausting her energy. He watches her, asleep in his arms. Ariel remarks that it was wonderful to see Bella cast a spell of that scale in such a short time. In her dreams, Bella murmurs that the theory is amazing, and that she can now easily create super compressed ether. The professor smiles and states that since Bella no longer needs the surgery, she'll inform Bradley to cancel the procedure herself. Professor Ariel comments that she's happy they avoided the surgery, and more importantly, that Bella didn't lose her magical control. Gray questions her about the magical control, and she confirms it. She then explains that Bradley's surgery, while increasing power, destroys control by forcibly removing a person's limiter. He then wonders if it was because of that surgery that the sorceress from his past couldn't control her magic. Ariel holds up the contract and states that, thanks to him, Bella has fulfilled her part of the agreement. She then declares that it's her turn to keep her promise. The professor approaches and says she will use a spell on his arm. From her hand, several butterflies materialize and fly around him. The creatures concentrate on his arm. The energy released by the butterflies completely envelops him. As soon as the spell ends, she asks how he feels, and he tries to move his hand. He looks at her and confirms he can move it. With a smile, the young man thanks the professor. Gray says that not even healing potions worked, but Ariel corrects him, explaining that her magic restores nerves. She then challenges him to wield a sword to see if his arm is back to normal, and he accepts. Gray prepares to test his newly healed arm. He then materializes a blade for the test. He observes the sword in his hand. With a series of swift movements, he tests the arm's agility, but he stops, noticing something is wrong. The young man remarks that his arm doesn't move like it used to. Professor Ariel explains that while she repaired the nerves, her magic cannot heal the wounds of his soul. She confirms what she said, much to his surprise. Ariel says that current magical knowledge hasn't proven the soul's existence, but she believes it does exist. She then covers one of her eyes. With her special eye, she claims she can see it. The professor reveals that his soul is healing slowly and will recover if he doesn't overexert himself. He looks down at his own hand, repeating her words. He asks if he should stop training, but she says it's not necessary if he exercises normally. Then she questions what kind of swordsmanship could wound someone's soul in such a way. The professor mentions a type of swordsmanship that uses the soul to move the sword. She then brings up the name Amy White and asks if he knows her. He is startled, wondering why she would mention the Sword Saint's name, since they shouldn't even know each other yet. Ariel asks if she's wrong, as the way he wields a sword reminds her of Amy. But she notices a slight difference and assumes his master is even more skilled. The professor adds that in a few years, Amy will reach the same skill level, leaving him surprised by what she knows. He tries to change the subject, saying he learned it in his hometown, and asks if swordsmanship can truly harm the soul. The woman replies that ordinary swordsmanship certainly couldn't. She continues, explaining that a normal strike could never defeat an ogre general and everything around it with a single slash. He finally realizes that she already knew about the incident. Ariel confirms this and reveals that, Thanks to him, she has practically won the bet. The professor says she saw the remains of the scene and that not even the most advanced magic could have done that. She then points at him and asks if he used that mysterious power. Gray asks if she can see it with her eye, and the woman confirms that she can. The professor states that she can see the power leaking through a chained door. The chained door is the image the professor uses to describe the power she sees within him. Gray realizes this isn't just a guess. She can actually see his hidden power. The professor then reveals she has seen a power similar to his before, though with a different vibe. He asks her if there are other people with a power like his. She confirms there are, but she isn't sure if they are human or not. Then she reveals they are called the Liquidator. The professor notices that he's heard of them. He doesn't understand why that name is being mentioned in this era. Next to a sleeping Bella, Ariel comments that she's heard of it, but didn't think the name was so well known. But she supposes it's no surprise, since he knows such an advanced magical theory. Gray confirms to himself that his knowledge is from the future, though no one suspects it. Then the professor asks him how much he knows about the Liquidator. He simply replies that it is an extremely dangerous threat to humanity. The young man states that it must be stopped before it appears or destroyed at all costs otherwise. Ariel agrees that it's dangerous, but notes that Balian Bradley seems determined to continue with his experiments. Gray questions Balian's connection to the matter. The professor looks at him and asks how else he would be related. Then she reveals that the Liquidator is the being he's trying to summon. The young man is shocked by the revelation, as no one ever said the Liquidator was a human creation. He then remembers that, in the previous timeline, the Academy acted strangely. They seemed to know exactly where the Liquidator would appear. With a sudden realization, he looks at the professor. Gray wonders if the Academy was involved in the summoning all along. Gray insists the experiment must be stopped immediately, and Professor Ariel agrees, but she explains she has no authority to stop another professor, and that her superiors wouldn't listen. The young man then asks who exactly these superiors are. Ariel replies that she can't say, and that only an order from the top can stop the experiment. He reflects that the Academy's leadership is more complicated than he imagined. Then the young man wonders if the fact that Bradley is a criminal doesn't change the situation. He remembers the illegal experiments from the future and knows exactly where they were conducted. Gray claims he knows the location of the experiments and that they can catch him red-handed. But the professor rejects the idea, explaining that breaking into a professor's lab is already a serious crime. She warns him that without concrete proof, they would be the ones arrested, and asks if he has any evidence right now. The young man remains silent, and she says the matter should be dropped for now. He clenches his fist and says he understands her situation. Ariel changes the subject to his power and asks if he wants to learn how to control it. Surprised, he asks if she can do that, and she mentions a professor who specializes in unknown forces. The professor then reveals his name, Heathcote Longfellow. Gray is surprised to hear the name Heathcote Longfellow, the man who trained the Sword Saint herself. Professor Ariel says she figured that would interest him and offers to arrange a private training session for the next day. He accepts immediately, stating that the reason he joined the Academy was to master his power. The young man can hardly believe he found a lead so quickly. The next day, he begins his training with Professor Heathcote. Gray reflects on receiving private lessons from the famous master, but he wonders why they are just running through the forest. They cover a long distance through a wooded area of the Academy. The professor scolds him for getting distracted and orders him to run to his absolute limit. Heathcote explains that only when his physical strength is exhausted will his soul's power awaken, and they won't touch a sword until then. As he runs, the young man thinks the training must have a purpose, but worries about Balian's experiments. He then questions if he's doing the right thing. A week later, Gray reports to Professor Ariel, who asks how the training is going. He replies that they basically just run, with a little sword training at the end, but admits he feels stronger. Ariel smiles and remarks that's just like Heathcote. A man enters the room and excuses himself. He hands a sealed letter to Professor Ariel, who thanks him. Gray watches as she opens and reads the contents. The professor reads the letter in silence. The young man asks what's wrong, and she hands him the paper. He begins to read the message. Balian Bradley's letter states that although Bella obtained a similar power, she didn't actually compress it. Therefore, her new ability is not recognized as super compressed ether, and the operation will proceed as planned. Gray crumples the letter and declares that this is insane. The professor comments that Bradley seems determined to force the surgery, even though it's no longer necessary. The young man asks if Bella can't just refuse, but Ariel explains that the contract is strict. Unless Bradley himself voids it, Bella's only options are expulsion or the operation, but Gray refuses to accept the situation. The professor slams her hand on the table and asks for his help. He then asks her to reveal the location of Bradley's lab so they can expose him, him and nullify the contract. With a smile, Gray asks if she hadn't said it would be dangerous to act without proof. Professor Ariel replies that they will find the proof and that she is putting her faith in him. But she corrects herself, saying that perhaps she had it from the beginning, as her eye told her the truth. She then reveals that her eye showed her he was telling the truth all along. Ariel admits that it just took her a while to accept the truth, and he stares at her. The professor then turns to him and asks him to lead the way. She declares that together, they will bring Bradley's crimes to light. Gray reveals the lab is in the mountains near Toril Village. The professor remembers he has an Academy-authorized lab in that location. He questions why he would conduct illegal experiments in an authorized lab. Ariel explains it's the perfect place, as no one would suspect a thing, and he could stay there for a long time. Besides, no Academy professor would interfere with another's lab. Gray concludes that if they can get the evidence, raiding the lab won't be a problem. Someone knocks on the door, and hearing Bella's voice, the professor tells her to come in. The young woman enters holding a letter and tells the professor she received it. Ariel takes the envelope to check its contents. The professor opens the letter and tells the girl not to worry, as she'll take care of everything. Bella and Gray watch the professor, confused. The young woman then asks if the professor intends to fight Varian Bradley alone because of her. Ariel simply replies with a faint smile. She then states that she alone is enough to handle the situation. Bella and Gray watch her, surprised by her declaration. Gray asks the professor to wait and says he'll go with her. Bella also offers to go, stating that the problem is hers after all. The professor cuts them off, reminding them that Bradley is a teacher and a dangerous lunatic. She says she can't let them go to such a dangerous place, but the young man argues that's exactly why she shouldn't go alone, and that he can help with his power. He also adds that, as her student, he'd be expelled if she disappeared. Gray asks her to let them decide their own fates. The professor stares at them through the reflection in her monocle. She then sighs, saying they would go anyway, even if she tried to stop them. Ariel agrees to take them, but on one condition. The professor demands that, no matter what happens, they must prioritize their own safety. They agree to her condition. The group then travels into the mountains under the moonlight. Hiding in the forest, they watch the lab, and Gray questions if the illegal experiments are really happening there. Ariel confirms it and says they are there to find the proof. Gray Lee confirms that this is definitely the place. Bella says she trusts him, but asks if they can get the proof without any trouble. Professor Ariel explains that Varian is at a conference, and they'll have to enter through the side wall to avoid any traps. The young woman questions if that's really a good idea, but Ariel reassures her, saying they're already committing a crime anyway, and she can go back if she wants. Bella tightens her grip on her staff and confirms she's going. She then asks the professor if she's sure about doing all this for someone like her. He cuts her off, saying she's wrong. Gray then explains that stopping the experiments is for the good of the world, because the entire world will be sacrificed. The girl asks him what he means by that. The professor agrees he must be stopped and tells Bella not to worry. Ariel states they aren't risking their lives for her sake. Then she gives the order to advance, and the three of them leap toward the lab. The professor conjures an attack spell, and with a single strike, she destroys the lab's side wall. A massive explosion blows a hole in the laboratory wall. Gray Lee observes the destruction and comments that it was overkill. The group then enters the site through the newly created opening, but he is surprised by what he sees inside the lab. In one of the cells, a hand is chained to the wall. Through the bars, they see bodies scattered on the floor. The young man comments that they won't need to look for evidence anymore. Bella observes the number of victims lying on the floor. Professor Ariel states she can see 14 forbidden spells, in addition to the illegal experiments. They continue to explore the place cautiously. In a wider room, he spots what looks like a summoning altar. The young woman asks what they should do now, and if they should rescue any survivors. But Gray warns her they shouldn't take too long, as Varian could return at any moment. Suddenly, he senses a presence. A mysterious voice asks if they were calling for him. Professor Ariel wonders about his conference. Varian Bradley appears before them. The group is startled by the professor's sudden appearance. He reveals that he sent a double to the conference, as he had an important experiment to conduct. Ariel questions him about the experiment, and Varian confirms he has new materials. He says he'd like to use them while they're still fresh, but then he stares at them. Professor Varian declares a change of plans. The three of them brace for what's to come. He observes them through the reflection in his glasses, commenting that he needed materials with more magical potential. Varian admits he doesn't know how they discovered his experiments, but he assumes they haven't told anyone. He then says that if they were to suddenly disappear, no one would ever suspect him. A student asks if they will be used as ingredients, but Varian Bradley just says their sacrifice will expand the limits of magic. With a smile, he states that since he can't let them leave alive, he'll make sure they are put to good use. Suddenly, a large explosion rushes toward Varian. The attack hits the hallway with great force. Bella Albright is the one who fires the spell with her staff, while Professor Ariel watches the scene. After the dust settles, Varian deems the display of power magnificent. He turns to the group, repeating that it was truly magnificent. Varian's energy manifests around him. He comments that the Divine Eye Ariel is still in good shape and that the special admission student has exceptional talent. Varian then decides he should perhaps take a closer look at the other Divine Eye recruits. He confronts them from a distance, questioning a student's attempt to murder a professor. Bella replies that it's better to kill than be killed, even if she missed her chance. Professor Ariel announces their withdrawal, stating they have enough proof and the Academy can handle the rest. But Varian asks if they really thought he would just let them leave, unleashing his power. A wave of energy surges directly towards Bella. Professor Ariel steps forward to intercept the attack with a barrier. Behind her, Professor Carlos just screams her name, but Varian Bradley claims it's useless, as this is one of the fruits of his research, the flame of gluttony. He explains that it's a fire that devours defensive magic, turning the opponent's defense into its own fuel. Professor Ariel watches as he remarks that its only drawback is the cost of a rare material to cast it. The professor's barrier begins to shatter. Then, her monocle cracks. She is thrown back by the impact. Another defensive spell appears to hold back the advancing flames. Bella Albright steps up to protect the group. Ariel then instructs her to take the spell memory bag to Gray, and says that if Heathcote Longfellow sees it, he'll know what to do. Bella stomps her foot on the ground. A large spherical barrier expands, protecting everyone from Varian's attack. Professor Ariel questions what Bella Albright is doing and urges her to run, but Bella says the professor's barrier is breaking and that she'll handle the situation herself. Ariel reminds her of their promise that she should put her life first, as Varian's magic can't be stopped with defensive spells. The professor's barrier shatters. Then, Bella simply says it's all right. Her magic clashes directly with Varian's attack. She explains that his spell isn't that strong. It just requires a different type of defensive magic. Varian Bradley is surprised, as the theory to nullify his magic was known only to his group, and he demands to know how she knows it. Bella replies that someone recently taught her a new theory, and with it, the spell becomes easy. He then questions her about who taught her. Varian shouts, demanding the traitor's name in exchange for a clean death. The young woman asks if he really wants to know who it was, and with a smile, she just says, "It's a secret." Bella recalls Gray Lee explaining that even though he's a swordsmanship student, the formula to nullify Varian's spell was correct. Varian concludes she won't give him a straight answer. Varian Bradley resigns himself and holds up a large crystal. Then, he orders them to burn alive. He crushes the crystal in his hand. A torrent of energy with floating skulls surges forward. The attack moves quickly down the hall. The energy condenses into a dark vortex. Varian launches the spell towards the group. Gray Lee asks if Bella Albright is okay, and she says she is, as the barrier can hold. But she hesitates for a moment. Varian Bradley taunts her, stating her mana reserves won't last more than a minute. Bella then asks Professor Ariel to attack him, since her hands are busy with the defense, and she agrees. The professor analyzes the attack before her. She notices the flames are thinner at one point, and that she can project mana outside the barrier. Her hand passes through the barrier, generating electricity. Now outside, Ariel prepares to cast her spell. Professor Ariel fires an electric blast towards Varian. The spell shoots down the hall at high speed, but the attack simply dissipates before hitting its target. Varian Bradley remarks that their counterattack attempt won't even reach him. Gray Lee remembers that the professor's offensive magic is one of the weakest among the staff, and given the flame's properties, it must be absorbing the cast spells. The group is left not knowing what to do. Then, Bella Albright warns that she's almost out of mana to maintain the barrier. Ariel turns to the students and says this is why she told them to run. She looks at Gray with concern. He then steps closer and tells the professor to leave the rest to him. Bella questions his plan, stating that his sword can't reach the enemy from that distance. But Gray just replies that it's fine, and that he's sure he'll reach him. The professor warns him, as using that power again could kill him, and his arm might never recover. He then reflects on the possibility of dying alone. Gray Lee then states that this is better than the three of them dying together. Suddenly, a point of light appears in the center of Varian Bradley's magic. Gray's image appears reflected in a drop of liquid. He strikes from above, cutting through Varian's spell. Gray lunges forward with his blade in a precise strike. Varian Bradley looks at the hallway, now clear of his magic. Gray Lee and the others watch from a distance. Bella Albright just stares at him, completely surprised by what happened. Then, Varian's body collapses, defeated. Professor Ariel comments that it's the first time she's seen his true power with her own eyes, but the impact of the strike makes the ceiling start to crumble above them. Large pieces of debris fall towards the group. A figure lands softly on the ground. The debris stops in midair, suspended by thin lines of energy. Ariel comments that this was beyond her expectations. Putting that aside, she turns to Gray and asks if he's all right. He replies that his dominant arm hurts a little and is numb, but as he grips his sword, Gray states that he can still move it. The professor concludes that his training is showing results, and the young man agrees. Gray reflects that if it were like before, he would have been unconscious for days, but now it's just a sore arm. Gray remembers his training with Heathcote Longfellow, who encouraged him to use every last drop of his strength. Professor Ariel remains silent, observing the young man. She approaches, thankful they're alive, but regrets that he had to use that power. Gray tells her not to worry, as he was the one who insisted on stopping Varian, and thanks her. She then asks him, if possible, to try not to use that power for a while. The professor warns him that otherwise, the damage will be irreversible. Gray stares at her, surprised. He stays silent for a moment. Then the young man simply apologizes. Bella asks if that was magic, since she didn't sense any ether. She says it's impossible to explain so much power with just magic. Ariel then apologizes and asks Bella not to look into it any further, or talk about what she saw. Bella asks why, as Ariel prepares a spell in her hand. Ariel then threatens her, saying she'll be forced to erase her memories if she doesn't promise. Bella quickly agrees and asks if they should make a magical contract. Ariel agrees, telling them to proceed with the contract. They then seal the magical agreement with a signature. Ariel asks what they'll do next, and Gray suggests they first help the people lying on the floor. He notes that they only seem to be magically asleep. Ariel says that although they're not in danger, they should take them to the Academy's medical facilities to be safe. Then she casts a spell that envelops all the prisoners. The magic will protect them from any external harm for the time being. With that settled, Ariel decides to investigate further, remarking that the place is insane. The professor reveals that her eye can see the illegal experiments, which used human sacrifices to create magical catalysts, and that they were also used to enhance a person's magical abilities. She sees no experiments related to the liquidator, guessing it might be in another facility. Gray Lee finds this strange. This was the site of the incident that killed thousands in his past life. He then remembers that what killed all those people was a miasma that sprouted from the ground. Ariel notices the change in Gray and asks what's wrong. Bella also calls his name, beginning to understand the true gravity of the situation. Gray Lee wonders if there could be something beneath this place. He then suggests there might be secret passages leading underground. Professor Ariel considers the possibility for a moment. After scanning the floor, she states that she sees no hidden passages. Ariel focuses her vision once more to be sure. Suddenly, she tells everyone to wait and approaches Varian Bradley's body. The professor kneels to inspect the spot where he fell. She says that, although faint, she can sense traces of short-distance teleportation magic. Ariel concludes the destination is about 300 meters away and that there must be something there. Gray asks if they can get 300 meters underground, and Ariel confirms she can use a teleportation gate. She then says they should try it and snaps her fingers. A large magic circle forms on the ground, surrounding the entire group. The professor notes that if there's nothing at the destination, the gate will just lead them into the earth. The circle activates with a large burst of energy. Everyone looks down, surprised by what they see through the portal. The portal reveals an immense city built entirely underground. Professor Ariel is surprised by the existence of such a large space beneath this place. Bella then feels a tremendous emission of ether coming from everywhere, especially from one specific point. And then she points toward a large circular structure in the city's center. Ariel realizes it's not just ether, but a different power, far greater than anything she has ever seen. Gray Lee then wonders if that different power could be what he suspects it is. The professor simply confirms his suspicion. Then, she reveals that it is the power of the liquidator, emanating from the central structure. The group approaches the large circular building in the city center. Upon entering, they find a large, sealed door at the end of the hall. Ariel confirms that the power is definitely coming from that place, but she notices there's no sign of the liquidator and touches the door. Bella asks if she's sure they should be messing with it, but the professor just tells her to relax. She opens the door slightly, stating that it holds no power. Bella Albright then says the door was placed there merely as a symbol for the ritual. Ariel agrees, explaining that the power isn't in the door. She reveals the source is in the magical equipment all around them. Inside one of the devices, a form of energy manifests. Suddenly, the entire system activates, and the group watches from a distance. Gray asks what's happening and if they're trying to summon the liquidator. Bella insists the magic is too dangerous, and that they need to shut it down now. But Ariel stops her, as her foresight tells her this facility can't actually summon the liquidator. The large door ahead then begins to shatter. Gray Lee shouts that space is being torn apart, and Bella calls out for the professor. The energy from the equipment intensifies as the door continues to shatter. Gray and Bella watch the scene, not understanding what's happening. Professor Ariel then states that she already knew, as the energy in one of the devices stabilizes. She explains that the devices don't summon the liquidator, but merely open a small rift to where it exists. The substance gathers on the ceiling, channeling the power leaking through the rift. Ariel reveals the core used to crystallize this power as human lives, estimating that about 10 souls have been used so far. She surmises that most of the people they saw upstairs were captured to serve as raw material. Bella then questions her about why they would go so far to gather power, and the professor asks if she didn't see. The professor refers to the black flame Varian used in the fight, and explains that the crystal which enhanced it is basically what the catalyst will look like when it's ready, but she warns that the catalyst won't be limited to flames, and that if they mass produce it, there's no telling what they plan to do. Ariel then notices the cracks on the door are disappearing. Gray wonders if Varian wasn't trying to summon the liquidator, and the professor replies she doesn't know if he didn't try or just couldn't succeed. She concludes that the space opening equipment was pushed to its limit, and that perhaps this was all they could do. Bella Albright comments that the apparatus is incredibly valuable, as she's never seen such precise, high-power space warping magic before. Professor Ariel agrees, adding that building one would cost a nation's budget, and that only one organization could have 8 of them. Bella suggests it might be the Discar Empire, but Ariel denies the possibility. She explains that although it's the largest country in the world, they likely don't have the magical research resources to build one of these. Bella then asks who it could be. Then she deduces it must be an organization whose magical research surpasses even the Empire's. Gray Lee then intervenes, suggesting it's the World Union Academy. The suggestion leaves Bella completely stunned. Ariel confirms Gray's suspicion, stating that no other research body could afford this scale and budget. The group stands in silence at the revelation. The young woman questions if the Academy is behind this, since its purpose is to defend the world from threats. The professor understands why she doesn't want to believe it, but reinforces that no other group is capable of such a feat. Gray argues that this doesn't mean the entire Academy is the enemy, as the majority might still be on their side. He remembers that before the reset, the Academy's main forces were on the front lines, and he states that after seeing that future, he can't believe the Academy is humanity's enemy. Professor Ariel agrees, saying it's exactly as he said. She believes most of the Academy probably acts for the good of humanity and wouldn't allow experiments that waste lives. But the Academy has countless researchers, and with so many facilities, it's unlikely anyone in this world truly knows the full picture. The image of the Grand Hall reinforces the idea of the Academy's vastness. Ariel adds that whoever was behind Varian had very strong support, as he couldn't have organized all of this alone. Bella Albright then asks if they can't fully trust the Academy, and the professor says she's been watching it from the inside for decades. She then confirms that it is definitely not an organization that can be blindly trusted. The professor believes most people inside, including those responsible for the experiment, must think they are doing what's best for humanity, and that they've likely convinced themselves it was all for the greater good. The truth is buried in darkness. Gray Lee asks if there's any idea how to find the mastermind, but Ariel reveals there are no communication devices in the facility. She explains that not even the creator's magical residue was left on the equipment, making the search for clues very difficult. Ariel then hesitates for a moment before continuing. Suddenly, one of the devices explodes behind Bella. Gray Lee is startled by the explosion starting all around him. The entire hall explodes in a chain reaction. Professor Ariel deduces they installed mechanisms to erase the evidence and wonders why they didn't detonate the place when Varian died. Bella Albright cuts her off, saying it's no time for hypotheses and that they need to get out of there. But the professor calms her down, explaining they are just magical explosives. She then touches the ground, stating that the professors of the World Union Academy aren't that weak. With a smile, Ariel declares they won't be killed by something like this. A large magic circle forms on the ground, protecting the group as the hall collapses. Professor Ariel warns them not to leave the magic circle while she channels the energy. Explosions rip through the area, but the barrier keeps them safe at the center. The hall is completely destroyed, leaving only the platform where they stand. Under the moonlight, the group is teleported to the outskirts of a large structure. The spell brings with them everyone who had been captured. Ariel notes that everyone who was captured managed to escape safely. Gray Lee remarks that he thought he was going to die, and that the situation was too dangerous. The professor explains that the teleportation was slow due to the extra baggage, but it was worth it since they recovered the equipment. With the devices in hand, she states that the Academy can no longer ignore them. In a room with an ornate door, the group prepares to report what happened. A man informs them that the survivors are being treated in the Academy's medical wing. The headmaster of the World Union Academy, Orodrom Alexandro, thanks them for stopping Varian's illegal experiments. He then questions them about the magic engines Varian possessed. Orodrom shows them a document, stating that each one is worth more than the budget of an entire nation. Professor Ariel agrees, questioning how Varian managed to gather 8 of these devices on his own. Orodrom reveals that the equipment is stolen property. He explains they were stolen during transport, resulting in the deaths of 78 agents. The revelation shocks everyone in the room. Ariel then remembers the incident from 15 years ago. The headmaster confirms, stating the stolen cargo contained those engines and that he remembers who was responsible. Then, he reveals the name Blood Drinker and asks if they've ever heard of it. Gray Lee identifies them as the world's largest criminal organization, and Bella adds that they are parasites who always resurface. The memory visibly affects him. Bella Albright then reveals that they also killed her parents. Aradram explains that they can be exterminated, but they always resurface, and no one knows where they hide or who leads them. He adds that some say more than 78% of all crime-related deaths are their doing. The headmaster wouldn't be surprised if some of their members were already inside the academy, but it would be impossible to identify them, and the academy wouldn't act. Gray questions him, not understanding how the academy wouldn't act even with criminals infiltrated. Ariel explains that's how the academy operates now, giving anyone with talent a chance to grow stronger, without distinction. Oradram Alexandro agrees, stating that to the academy, it doesn't matter if they are criminals. Bella Albright finds the idea absurd, believing that criminals should be punished. The headmaster says he agrees, but his superiors don't share that view. She questions him, asking if he isn't the headmaster, and he replies that he's just a subordinate. He explains that while he's the face of the academy on paper, his authority is insignificant. He then asks if they want to know who really calls the shots. Bella and Gray Lee stare at him, waiting for the answer. Then, the headmaster simply advises them to get stronger. He explains that the more power they prove they have, the deeper into the academy they'll be allowed, and the more secrets they'll uncover. Orodram reveals that although he can't name names, there is an upperclassman with enough influence to shape the academy's direction, including the policy of accepting criminals. Gray then asks if they could change the academy if they became stronger than this person, and the headmaster confirms that maybe they could. The headmaster concludes by saying that around here, strength is everything. Gray and Bella clench their fists, determined. Oradram watches them with interest. He knows that Professor Ariel wouldn't have stood a chance against Varian alone. This leads him to conclude that the victory was the work of one of the two students, acknowledging that Ariel's divine eye is as sharp as ever. Oradram Alexandro smiles, saying he can't wait to see what kind of monsters she's training. Then, Gray Lee walks alone down a hallway in the academy. He clenches his hand, looking at the mark on his wrist. Gray concludes that power rules the academy, and that to take down the Liquidator or uncover its secrets, he needs something. He decides that first, he'll have to focus on getting stronger. Suddenly, a student rushes toward him, and Gray just wonders what's going on. The guy hits him with a direct kick. Gray slides across the floor from the force of the impact. He then manages to recover, crossing his arms. The attacker calls him tougher than expected, and Gray asks what his problem is. Indignant, the student repeats the question. He accuses Gray of walking around like he owns the place, and states that a special admission reject doesn't belong in this hallway. Gray then asks if he's looking for a fight, noting it's the first time someone has actually kicked him in the hallway. The guy says he'd love to, but gestures with his hand. As he turns, Gray notices Professor Ariel has appeared, and the student calls her Reject Number 2. The student just says, "See ya," and turns to leave down the hall. He apologizes as he walks away, explaining that surveillance prevented him from getting closer. Then, wiping blood from his lip, he promises he'll send someone else soon. Finally, he utters Varian's name. Professor Ariel approaches Gray Lee and asks what happened. He tells her some random student kicked him, saying a divine eye admit shouldn't even be walking the halls. She notes that without a weapon and no injuries, there's not much she can do about it officially. Then Ariel suggests he should go after the aggressor and finish him. Surprised, the young man asks if he's allowed to do that. The professor explains that as his superior, she can't permit it, but her eyesight has been poor lately, and she might not notice something happening nearby. Gray decides to let it go to avoid causing more trouble, but she questions his choice. Then she asks if students from the Divine Eye program are really that hated. The young man clarifies that people make fun of them sometimes, but this is the first time it's gotten physical. She just asks if they really make fun of him. Ariel then apologizes, saying she wishes she had more authority here, but he reassures her, stating that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't even be at the academy. Gray affirms that he, Bella, and the others will prove the Divine Eye program wasn't a mistake, because the professor has a good eye for talent. Elsewhere, Amy White prepares herself, and Bella Albright conjures her magic. Meanwhile, Jacob Bloomfield attacks. Professor Ariel remains silent for a moment. Then, she thanks Gray, but she warns him not to act like this is someone else's problem. Ariel reveals that out of the entire Divine Eye group, he's the one she expects the most from. She states that the others will become top top tier, but it was upon meeting him that she believed someone could surpass humanity. Gray replies that being compared to them is harsh. The professor stares at him intently. He then reflects that the mastermind behind Varian probably hasn't given up on summoning the Liquidator. After all, not even they could scratch that thing, and he returned to this timeline to make sure he can defeat it. The fate of this world rests in his hands. The scene shifts to a large coliseum inside the city. Later, in a classroom, the professor announces that the swordsmanship class will be a live combat practice. He instructs the students to pair up according to the list on the board. Gray Lee watches and comments that he'd better be on his game. He reflects that if he screws up, everyone will start bad-mouthing the Divine Eye admits again, so he needs to at least show he can keep up with the regular students. The young man reacts to his own conclusion. Then the board reveals his partner is Leonhard Apius. Leonhard is the top student in the swordsmanship course and the strongest first year. The professor states that he tried to pair students of similar skill levels and asks them to treat the fight as if it were real. Gray questions the similar skill levels, wondering how he, a special admit, ended up fighting the top student. He also imagines his opponent already hates the Divine Eye students and is probably dying to beat him up after the last incident. Suddenly, Leonhard greets him from behind. He comments that they seem to be partners, and he's very happy, since becoming the best in class was worth it to fight Lord Gray. Leonhard steps closer, declaring he's trained harder than anyone, and asks Gray to witness his true swordsmanship. Gray reacts to the intensity of his training partner. He realizes the smile is because Leonhard is relishing the chance to finally beat him up legally. In the middle of the arena, the instructor asks if everyone is ready. He then yells for them to begin. Leonhard charges forward, shouting, "Here I come!" Gray blocks Leonhard's first strike, their swords clashing. He struggles to withstand the pressure of the attack. Leonhard shoves him back with a powerful blow. The swordsman focuses for his next move. He unleashes another attack, which Gray manages to parry. The young man holds his sword with both hands to resist the force. In another part of the arena, two other students cross swords. Leonhard comments that his opponent is strong and that it's hard to believe he didn't get in through normal admission. Gray defends himself from multiple simultaneous attacks. Gray thinks that even though he's holding on, he can't match his raw strength, even using both arms. He realizes Leonhard's swordsmanship is a standard style, but one he's perfected to a frightening level. The swordsman takes a step forward. Gray concludes that for someone in their first life, he's a monster. The fight continues throughout the arena, with several students in combat. A spectator comments that Gray is actually keeping up with Leonhard and that it's amazing. Leonhard declares that he could do this all day, but Gray's stamina can't keep up. He reflects that if it weren't for Professor Heathcote's training, he'd already be on the ground. The young man wonders why his opponent isn't even out of breath. Realizing he's running out of breath quickly, Gray decides he needs to end the fight now. He remembers the professor told them to fight as if it were real. His expression changes. Leonhard raises his sword for a final blow, but Gray dodges the attack, leaning backward. He plants a hand on the ground for balance. Leonhard reacts, surprised by the move. Then, from his low stance, Gray lands a kick on his opponent's leg. Leonhard loses his balance mid-air, wondering what just happened. Gray watches him from the ground. Then, Leonhard realizes his opponent is treating this like a real life or death battle, but he tightens his grip on his sword and declares he can't afford to lose. The next instant, a sword's blade is at his neck. The tip of the weapon presses against his skin. Gray stands over Leonhard, who is on the ground with the sword pointed at him. Then, the young man extends his hand and says it was a draw. Leonhard accepts the help to get up, but states that's not quite right. He explains that at the last moment, all he could do was swing his sword. Gray, on the other hand, could have run him through the heart if he'd wanted to. Leonhard concludes that because it was a mock battle, he forced himself to aim for the neck and asks if he's wrong. Gray replies that even with protection spells, aiming a sword at someone's heart in a sparring match is wrong. With that, Leonhard declares that it still means he lost. Leonhard thanks him, saying he finally understands the difference between real combat and swordsmanship, and that fighting isn't just about sword skills. Gray admits it was a bit of a dirty move for a swordsmanship class, but Leonhard counters that the instructor told them to treat it like real combat, and there's no such thing as cheating in a real fight. Then, he takes a step forward. He then challenges Gray to another round. Gray wonders if they're really going to fight again already. He reflects that he only won by catching him off guard, and that in a straight fight, Leonhard's technique would have put him on the ground. Suddenly, a voice tells them to stop right there. A student approaches and says that combat training or not, no one said they could use anything other than a sword. He questions how a special admission loser like Gray got paired with the top student and tells him not to get cocky. Gray just reflects that he wasn't the one who chose the pairing. Leonhard steps in, stating the professor decided he was the only one worthy of fighting Gray, and tells the other student to stay out of it. The professor approaches and confirms that he made the pairs, matching students with similar overall strength. He states that Gray is the only one who can face Leonhard. The professor then challenges the dissatisfied student to try it himself, saying that if he beats Gray, he can be Leonhardt's opponent. The student simply replies that it's fine by him. He boasts about beating the examiner to get in and says not to compare him to someone who barely passed. Leonhardt reflects that the newcomer is judging Gray by his admission category, without knowing his strength, which reminds him of how he used to be. Gray considers that, honestly, this is a good chance for his partner's power to be recognized, but Leonhardt turns to the challenger and thinks that, more importantly, he interrupted his time with Lord Gray. The student watches him. Then Leonhardt states that, for this crime alone, he deserves death. The newcomer wonders why he got so angry. The professor intervenes, saying that if he doesn't like the real combat rule, they can use just swords, and asks if Gray agrees. Gray reflects that he has no idea of his opponent's strength, but knows it won't be easy if he passed the regular exams. He recognizes that his adversary has more stamina and strength, and that not even his brutal training can overcome years of proper conditioning. So he says he's not confident in his skills, but asks if he won't be expelled if he loses. The professor confirms it's just a class exercise, but instructs them not to go easy on each other. Gray agrees, and both fighters prepare for combat. The instructor gives the signal to begin, and the student immediately charges forward. The student shouts that it's time to put the special admit in his place and make him learn his role. Gray blocks his opponent's strike with his sword. He wonders about something. The two blades press against each other. The impact throws the challenger backward. The challenger reacts with surprise, while Gray realizes the blow was light and his power is nothing special. The student rushes in to attack again. Then Gray wonders if his opponent is holding back. With a single move, he disarms his adversary. The student falls to the ground from the impact of the blow. The professor declares the fight is over. Gray approaches and asks if he's okay, thinking he expected him to dodge. The fallen student claims it was luck and that he just caught him off guard. He gets up and demands to fight one more time. The professor tells them to go ahead until he's satisfied. The student attacks Gray again and again. Sometime later, the sky is clear over the arena. Gray approaches the fallen student and asks if he's all right. The boy starts to answer. With his face completely swollen, he claims he's fine. The professor says that's enough and asks someone to take the student to the infirmary. Then, the instructor announces that this year's representatives are Gray and Leon, asking if there are any objections. Gray asks what it means to be representatives. Leonhardt explains that the best of the first years face the second-year champion. The professor adds that it's for the inter-year battle. He points to the students, informing them that the first years have lost 35 times in a row. But the instructor states that maybe this year will be different. Gray wonders about the 35 consecutive losses. He asks if the power gap between the years is really that big, and the professor confirms that 1 year at the academy makes a huge difference. The instructor explains that losing is normal, even expected. He continues, saying that just putting up a good fight is impressive enough, and a victory would go down in history as a miracle. Then, he places a hand on Gray's shoulder. The professor tells them not to stress too much and dismisses the class. Gray reflects that the inter-year battle isn't as serious as he imagined, but as a special student of the Divine Eye, he sees it as the perfect opportunity to prove he can fight. The young man then decides he needs to train hard. At a faculty meeting, the last item on the agenda is Professor Budra's proposal. Professor Ariel listens intently. Professor Budra, from the magic department, proposes that the Divine Eye student, Amy White, be expelled. Ariel questions him, stating she's responsible for the Divine Eye students, but he replies that's precisely the problem. He explains that Amy White failed her third-year advancement exam and was only allowed to stay because she was a special admission. Budra concludes by asking how that could possibly seem fair, since all the other students who failed were expelled. Ariel defends her student, explaining she's developing a world-class combat ability, but a reaction in her body prevents her from using her full power. One professor reacts with disdain. He says the side effect excuse makes a useless student sound like a prodigy and asks how long she'll keep up this fantasy. She insists it's the truth, and that the student could gain full control any day, but if they push her, she might lose that chance forever. Another professor points out that she's used the same excuse before. He then asks if her plan is to let someone who doesn't meet the Academy's standards stay indefinitely. Ariel argues that the Academy exists to nurture talent, and expelling a gifted individual who doesn't fit the system goes against its very purpose. Budra questions her use of the word talent. He remarks that perhaps the special picks were impressive in the past, but the current crop is full of failures. Ariel remembers Amy White, Bella Albright, and Jacob Bloomfield. Another professor suggests that the Great Divine Eye is losing its insight and that maybe it's time to consider abolishing the program entirely. Surprised, she asks what they're talking about. The professor reminds her that the program was established by the founding council and can be abolished if more than half the faculty agrees. A colleague agrees, saying the current Divine Eye students are unimpressive. Another adds that he's heard of Bella Albright's improvement, but it's no great achievement, and her mana capacity is questionable. Ariel begins to respond. A professor agrees that while former Divine Eye students were impressive, the recent class doesn't have the same impact as before. Several professors react with sneers. Other faculty members watch with contempt. She realizes there are more voices against the Divine Eye than she thought, and at this rate, the program could really be shut down. Budra states that the program has been outdated for a long time, and that it's time for them to move on. A colleague taunts her, asking if she still plans to claim she can judge talent better than the rest of them. She clenches her fist, wanting to say yes, but she knows it would only provoke them. Ariel knows they already dislike her. Still, she reflects that many professors care about whether the program benefits the academy, and she can't say anything that would turn them against her. Ariel remains silent. Budra asks if the cat's got her tongue, saying at least she knows she's past her prime. Another professor agrees, saying maybe it's time for her to retire before she ruins her legacy. One of the professors suggests that if she wants to raise her favorite students as she sees fit, she should open her own school. A professor calls the idea brilliant and says she'll be lucky to find any students who would follow a decaying Divine Eye. But Ariel insists that those kids need more time, and if they get it, they will prove their worth. She concludes that she must prevent them from being expelled before that happens, at any cost. One of those present then asks about the Divine Eye students, mentioning one named Gray. Another professor remarks he's heard that Gray is promising among the first-year swordsmanship students and was chosen for the inter-year battle. Budra reacts, commenting that he does indeed sound promising. Then one of them suggests they let him prove his worth in the competition and decide the program's future based on the results. Professor Ariel considers the proposal in silence. She remembers Professor Heathcote Longfellow. Ariel hesitates to give an answer. She begins to explain that Gray's power isn't suited for mock battles, and that in a life-or-death situation, a professor slams his hand on the table and interrupts her, saying there she goes with the excuses again. He yells that if a student can't show their power in training, they won't show it in real combat, and everyone there knows it. Ariel stands up and retorts that they don't understand, as his skills aren't normal swordsmanship. Tension fills the faculty meeting room. A senior professor ends the meeting, declaring that the discussion is going nowhere, but he states that seeing the Divine Eye admit in action seems reasonable, and that they will decide after his performance in the battle. Ariel tries to object to the decision. As they leave, the other professors comment that they're now looking forward to the competition, as it should be quite a show. Professor Heathcote Longfellow leaves the room in silence. Alone in the room, Ariel remains seated at the table. She apologizes to everyone, stating that she is too weak. She then thinks back to Gray. His power isn't suited for mock battles, and he still needs time, and she knows that what she's hoping for is irrational. Even so, she makes a silent plea, a plea for help, a plea to help those children, those rough gems with world-class potential, and to protect their future. The day of the inter-year battle finally arrives. In the center of the crowded arena, the event start is announced. The announcer introduces the top first-year student, Leonhardt Appius. Next, he introduces the top second-year student, Lunal Hartman, and also the first-year challenger, Gray Lee. Finally, the second-year challenger, Diebel Radartle, is introduced. Gray recognizes him as the guy who attacked him in the hallway and wonders if he's really going to fight him. The announcer declares that everyone will witness what they are capable of. In the audience, many teachers watch intently. Among them is Professor Budra. Leonhardt questions why so many teachers are present. Lunal Hartman explains that it's a first, since only 3 showed up last year. Lunal wonders why there are so many today, and Leonhardt seems to understand the reason. He concludes that the teachers must be curious about Gray, and that they certainly have good taste. Lunal wonders if his classmate has always been like this. Then a professor confirms their guess is correct. They've come to witness the final battle of the Divine Eye's special admissions. The other students in the arena react to the news. Gray questions what they mean by final. One of the teachers asks if no one told him. Then Professor Budra announces that the Divine Eye class will be abolished. Shocked, Gray asks Professor Ariel if that's true. She stares at him in silence for a moment. The professor reflects that in his current state, the battle could kill him. Then, she takes a deep breath to compose herself. Ariel assures him that Budra is just trying to mess with his focus and instructs him to just fight. She remains silent, watching the competitors in the arena. Gray looks at the professor. He turns his face forward. Then, the young man replies that he'll do as she says. Budra simply tells them to go ahead and embarrass themselves. He thinks that as soon as they lose, the other teachers will finally realize her vision is no longer so sharp. Gray glares at the teachers and states he can't let that slide. Budra questions what he said, but the young man says he doesn't care if they insult him. He then warns him not to dare speak ill of Professor Ariel's judgment. The professor reacts to his statement. Budra asks what kind of strength her eye saw in him, stating that everyone else is convinced he will lose pathetically. Then Gray says fine, and that he will prove him wrong. The professor gets irritated with what he calls an arrogant brat. The announcer asks the participants to separate and go with their teammates. Ariel appreciates his confidence, but wonders what Gray is planning. She considers that if he were fighting the top student, his practical swordsmanship might give him a small chance, but he's been matched with a terrible opponent. Ariel reveals that Bradley surgically rewired Deeble Radartle's brain, turning him into a living weapon with inhuman reflexes. She concludes he's the worst possible opponent for Gray's ambush tactics. Then the professor wonders if he's planning to use that skill. Gray glares at the teacher's stand. Professor Ariel tells him not to worry about her, but asks him not to overdo it. Gray remains silent for a brief moment. Then he replies that he knows. The announcer announces the start of the top students' match, asking the representatives to step forward. He explains the arena is protected by magic. Victory means triggering the opponent's safeguard by fighting as if it were a real battle. Leonhardt and Lunal Hartman face each other. The announcer then shouts for the inter-year battle's top student match to begin. Leonhardt immediately charges forward, shouting, "Here I come!" Lunal waits for him and tells him to show what he's got. The two's swords clash in a rapid exchange of blows. The second-year student takes a step back. He then blocks a strong overhead attack. Lunal's counterattack unbalances Leonhardt. He puts a hand on the ground to keep from falling. Lunal then lands a kick on his opponent. Leonhardt reflects that he can't fight like Lord Grey. Lunal comments that he's very good, stronger than he himself was in his first year. Then he tells him to pick up the pace. Lunal challenges him to keep up. They exchange a new series of rapid blows. The first-year student is forced to retreat. Leonhardt's protective magic is activated. Lunal prepares for the final blow. The announcer shouts that it's over. The announcer declares Lunal the winner, and the two competitors thank each other for the fight. Next, the start of the challengers match is announced, and the representatives are called forward. Leonhardt wishes Gray good luck, who thanks him. The young man reflects that he's talked too much and now needs to back up his words. He remembers facing far more hopeless monsters before he traveled back in time. Compared to that, he believes this fight is winnable. The tip of Deeble Radartle's sword scrapes against the arena floor. He tells Professor Bradley to wait just a little longer, as he's about to send his opponent to the same place. Then Deeble finishes, saying he'll send him to hell. As the match is announced, the two opponents face each other in the middle of the arena. At the starting signal, he moves forward and clashes swords with his adversary. Blocking the blow, he defends with all his strength against the impact. The force of the attack throws him back, but he manages to stand his ground. Holding his sword, he comments aloud that the blow was heavy. His opponent then recalls the teacher mentioning his reflexes. Wondering how to fight, he realizes no tricks will work against such power. He then mentions he still has that one ability, but seems a bit hesitant. Cutting to a flashback, a woman warns him not to use that power. In that conversation, he just says it's fine, without really discussing it. She insists, saying the tournament isn't worth his life at all. She also warns that the arena's barrier wouldn't withstand all his power. Back in the present, he remains still, visibly tense over the difficult decision. Then, making a move, he rushes full speed toward his adversary. He reflects that, although he's ready, he can't kill someone in a school tournament. With a confident smile, the opponent faces him before launching his attack. Charging forward, he unleashes a series of rapid slashes in his direction. Thrown backward, he struggles to defend against the sequence of blows. Blocking the attack, he notices his rival's movements are strangely simple, but he soon realizes it's not a lack of skill. He's holding back on purpose. Suddenly, the opponent shows a wild grin, completely changing his stance. Seeing that expression, he tenses up and takes a step back, completely surprised. Unable to react in time, he's hit by a cut on his arm. About to be hit, he realizes he can't dodge the next blow. With a final strike, the opponent aims directly for his head to end the fight. Managing to block it, he doesn't understand how he stopped such a powerful attack. He thinks to himself that he shouldn't have had time to defend against that blow. Looking at his rival, he wonders if he weakened the attack on purpose. From a distance, the woman points, completely shocked by the outcome of that exchange. Understanding nothing, she expresses her confusion as she watches the fight intently. On his knees, the opponent wonders what kind of power that is in his chest. On his chest, a mysterious item releases an energy never before seen by anyone. Watching from the audience, the woman comments that the fight seems very one-sided. At this, one of the nobles says he could end the fight whenever he wanted. As he defends himself, another spectator comments that this proves his weakness. Then a man suggests that he might be trying to send them a message. Pressed against the sword, he hears the noble laughing and agreeing with the theory. Worried, the woman shouts for them to stop the fight, saying it's dangerous. With a smirk, the noble asks what exactly would be dangerous in a mock battle. Another man then explains that the arena is covered by a protection spell. He continues, saying that any fatal attack is automatically blocked by this barrier. Watching the fight, He asks if she has any other reason for wanting to stop it. Lying on the ground, the opponent just stares at him with a smile on his face. Nervously, she yells that she knows about the spell, but that it won't be enough. Suddenly, an immense energy explodes in the middle of the arena, surprising everyone. Wide-eyed, she watches the scene, unable to believe what is happening. Showing an insane smile, the opponent unleashes all his contained power. Raising his sword high, he envelops it in dark energy. Then he strikes downward, releasing an attack that destroys everything in its path. Seeing the attack approach, the protagonist is completely paralyzed and unable to react. Hitting the arena, the blow passes just inches from him, splitting the ground. Having dodged it by a hair, he looks at the damage, visibly terrified. Immediately after, a huge crack opens up, dividing the battlefield. Without stopping, the attack continues until it hits the arena's protective barrier. Hit by the energy, the noble cowers in his chair, completely terrified by it all. Amid the chaos, the woman shouts to everyone that she had warned them. Blaming someone named Bradley, she prepares to use her own magic. Trying to intervene, her magic ends up being blocked by another protective barrier. She then realizes she can't use her magic because of the spectators' barrier. Desperate, she screams that it's an emergency and to cancel the tournament immediately. In the audience, the noble panics, cursing the situation out loud. Shouting for him to run, she warns that it will take time to stop the attack. He then just questions the order to flee he just received. Facing the attack, he knows that if he turns his back, he will die instantly. Meanwhile, the audience is in a total panic over the chaos in the arena. Noticing the delay with the spells, a professor says they have no other choice. He just reflects that it might still be too early for what he has planned. Even so, he believes that Gray should already be able to do it. So he shouts at the boy to think of his body as if it were a sword. Amid the chaos, he wonders how to do something like that out of the blue. Determined to try, he plants his feet on the ground, ready to follow the order. Immediately after, he focuses completely and imagines himself as a single blade. Completely still, he faces the violent onslaught coming his way. Preparing for a counterattack, he takes on a new combat stance. With everything ready, his counterattack is about to collide with the charge. Unleashing a new power, he prepares for the confrontation with intense concentration. At this, the opponent becomes completely confused, not understanding the sudden shift in power. Watching his rival, he wonders if he was always this slow. He then dismisses the thought, realizing the true reason for the huge difference. Realizing he's gotten faster, he lunges forward and collides with the enemy's attack. Blocking the blow, he stops the giant blade coming his way. From the force of the impact, his opponent is thrown violently backward, unable to react. He then spins in the air and strikes the ground with a devastating blow. After the attack, a huge crater forms in the middle of the ruined arena. Shouting in shock, the nobleman questions how the defense barrier was broken. Seeing the destruction, a man worriedly asks if the other student is okay. Someone then desperately yells for them to call the medical team urgently. Emerging from the rubble, the opponent's hand grabs a rock to pull himself up. Not understanding a thing, the professor stands paralyzed, watching the scene unfold. Rising from the wreckage, the opponent reveals himself without a single scratch on his body. Yelling at the top of his lungs, the young man shows he took no damage from the hit. The woman then shouts that it's not over yet, and he confirms he understands. Facing his enemy, he remains focused in the middle of the battle arena. Advancing again, the opponent rushes him with a direct and swift attack. Hit head-on, he is thrown with full force to the other side. Meanwhile, the crowd screams in terror as energy spreads across the arena. Completely terrified, the nobleman asks what the hell he is seeing. She then asks about the barrier, and someone warns there are 10 seconds left. Even while being hit, he tries to defend himself from the opponent's barrage of attacks. With a focused gaze, he watches his adversary come at him again. In the blink of an eye, the opponent appears right in front of him to attack. With great effort, he manages to block the blow, crossing swords with his rival. Surprised, the opponent yells that there's no way he's human with that much strength. He then replies that he isn't exactly normal in this situation either. With a counterattack, he throws his adversary away, shattering the arena floor. Watching his rival, he notices the young man is still without a single visible scratch. Calling him slow, the rival advances and lands a blow. From the impact of the blow, he ends up spitting a lot of blood mid-fight. Seeing the scene from afar, the woman screams his name in complete despair. Though injured, he prepares to react, knowing he must strike back. Lying on the ground, he says he needs more power to keep fighting. With a determined look, he concentrates his energy for one last, decisive attack. His eyes fix on his rival as he prepares for the next charge. Advancing quickly, he pierces his opponent with his sword, landing the blow. As the rival screams in pain, he remains completely focused on the fight. Maintaining his stance, he faces the wounded enemy without a hint of hesitation. Suddenly, he is pierced from behind by the adversary's dark energy. Seeing this, the woman and the others in the crowd are left speechless. After all the destruction, the arena falls completely silent for a moment. Announcing that the barrier is down, She looks at the arena with great concern. Immediately, the professors jump into the arena to intervene in the fight. Using their powers, they manage to restrain the opponent to end the danger. Still on his knees, he tries to catch his breath after the intense battle. In that instant, a mysterious figure suddenly appears right behind the adversary. Pierced from within, the opponent screams in pain from the surprise attack. Rushing over to him, the woman asks if he's okay as she heals him. She then calls for help, telling them to use healing magic on him quickly. Enveloped by the magic, his wounds slowly begin to close as he lies on the ground. With the healing magic, his body gradually recovers from the damage. Feeling relieved, she is thankful he managed to survive the whole ordeal. Already on his feet, he thanks everyone with a smile. Shocked, one of the men asks how he's already able to stand. He then turns to the woman and asks how he is now. Using a magical item, she analyzes the current state of his body and soul. After the analysis, she says in a low voice that this is just unbelievable. She notes that his soul doesn't have a single scratch. When asked about his body, she explains that the healing magic took care of everything. From a distance, the professor comments that their plan to reduce the damage worked. He then wonders if all that destruction was with the damage reduced. Angrily, she yells that he could have died without the healing magic. Stating it will take time, the professor watches as he understands the reason for the training. Looking at the arena, she comments that a lot of things went off script from what they had planned. As the opponent is taken away, she just watches the whole scene in silence. Turning to an official, she asks to confirm who won the match. The explanation then confirms that the veteran's barrier was activated by his attack. With the result announced, he is declared the grand winner of the official selection. Everyone in the crowd celebrates, saying it was incredible that he beat a veteran. Confirming the victory, the professor says he broke his 39-loss streak. One of the nobles says that after this, no one can question her judgment. Agreeing with him, the professor says that no one will support abolishing the special slot anymore. Another man says they almost expelled a student with that level of talent. Seeing the young man being congratulated, she watches him intently from a distance. He then clenches his fist, feeling the result of the entire fight. With a smile, she thanks him for everything he has just done. Then, an older gentleman says the ones responsible for the proposal should reflect on their actions. Immediately, all the nobles present turn to stare at the man in the center. Being stared down by everyone, the nobleman breaks into a cold sweat, not knowing what to say. Trying to play it cool, the nobleman shouts he has other things to do and runs off. Taking the hint, the other guests also say their goodbyes and leave quickly. Watching the scene unfold, two gentlemen comment that she has mellowed out a lot over time. The professor then remarks that times have changed, and she agrees, a bit tense. Seeing the professor annoyed, he wonders if something happened to her in the past. Remarking that the distraction is over, he turns to deal with another matter. Then, an older man approaches, calling his name for a serious talk. With a serious look, the man stares him down, waiting for a response. A little suspicious, he asks what the man wants with him. Explaining the situation, he reveals that the upperclassman had a strange power in his body. Stating they will investigate, he says the fight put a student's life at risk. Taking responsibility, he apologizes on behalf of the academy for not noticing. Telling him not to worry, the young man says that in the end, nothing happened. Relieved by the answer, the man thanks him for his understanding. Changing his tone, he says the young man also unleashed something after his opponent did. Hearing the question, he just stares at the man with a very serious expression. The man then explains that his power wasn't magic, but something strange. Without beating around the bush, he asks what exactly that power he used was. Not knowing what to say, he remains silent for a brief moment. Deciding to hide the truth, he simply says he has no idea. Questioning how he couldn't know, the man hears him confirm that's the case. He then makes up a story that he didn't know, and that Professor Ariel was the one who told him, but she sees through the lie, remembering he's used that power before. In a message, he asks her to play along for an important reason. Understanding the strategy, she remarks that he doesn't act like a normal person would. Thanking him, she decides she has no choice but to help. Turning to the headmaster, she confirms she can see his power with her own eyes. She continues the story, saying she asked another professor for help with his training. With great confidence, she asks him to leave the matter to her. After a moment's thought, the headmaster says he can't refuse after that fight. Offering his help, the headmaster says the academy is at their disposal for whatever they need. A little surprised, she simply thanks him for the trust he's placed in them. Having resolved the situation, they exchange a knowing glance with subtle smiles. Announcing they will examine the opponent, he asks her to come with him. Saying it would be her pleasure, she accompanies him, leaving the young man behind. Elsewhere, they prepare to enter a room marked with a symbol. Inside the room, she sips a cup of tea while analyzing the situation. Handing over the report, she states that the analysis of the enemy's power is complete. She explains that the power used was nearly identical identical to that of the first enemy. Being the same power, this confirms the origin of the energy used in the fight. Confirming their suspicions, she says the same crystals were used again. With a worried look, he asks what happened to the opponent from the fight. After a sip, she reveals with grim seriousness that the boy died. Startled, he rises from his chair, but she stops him from speaking further. She then explains that the boy ceased to be himself the moment it was activated. She continues, saying he might have already been lost when the power was implanted. Stating that he was the target, she says it was retaliation for Bradley's death. Hearing the explanation, he simply replies that he understands the whole situation now. He then deduces that if this happened afterward, a third party must be behind it. She confirms this, warning that it will take some time to investigate all the connections. Taking a sip of tea, she comments that her intuition is telling her something. She suspects that the higher-ups at the academy are involved in the case. Saying he understands, he makes himself available to help in any way necessary. After his offer, she just observes the ring on her hand for a moment. Turning to the window, she thanks him for his offer to help with the investigation. Then she remarks that he used the power without damaging his own soul. He confirms, but says the damage to his body was much worse this time. Seeing her reaction, he's confused about what's really going on. Then she reveals that his training is moving to the next stage, surprising the young man. With a smile, she simply confirms the good news she just delivered. Pointing at him, she assures him that he will learn to control his power better. The scene shifts to an arena where numerous armored mannequins are scattered about. He then takes his position in the center of a field filled with countless training targets. Looking at the targets, he notes that this method is dangerous and extremely painful. The professor then asks if he's sure, offering him safer options. Without any hesitation, he confirms that this is his final decision. Accepting his choice, the professor orders him to begin the training immediately. Closing his eyes, he begins to concentrate for the difficult task ahead. He then recalls the instruction to move as a single blade. At that moment, the energy in his sword begins to shift, taking on a new form. Now enveloped by this new power, he prepares to put it all into practice. Opening his eyes, he announces he's ready and is starting his attack. With a single thrust, he lunges forward, destroying all the targets around him. His slashes tear through the metal armor as if it were paper. Unleashing a flurry of strikes, he destroys dozens of targets at once. In mid-air, he finishes his attack, leaving a trail of destruction behind him. From a distance, a group of mages remarks on how fast and incredible he is. With a focused gaze, the professor simply watches the training without a word. In the midst of the motion, his body starts to take damage from the power. Still, he continues the attack, ignoring the wounds appearing on his body. In great pain, he struggles to stay on his feet, gritting his teeth. Forced to his knees, he uses his sword to parry a strike from one of the mannequins. His body covered in wounds, he finally collapses, exhausted, in the middle of the field. Seeing him fall, the healing team immediately casts a recovery spell. Enveloped by the magic, his body begins to heal rapidly on the spot. Slowly, his wounds start to close, but the process is incredibly painful. Sitting up on the ground, he thanks everyone for helping him recover. The professor then tells him he's doing well, lasting longer each time. Lifting his sword, he says he didn't notice at the time, as he was too focused. Looking at the destruction, he comments that using that power really hurts him. The professor explains that the pain means he's pushing past his limits. Though he understands the risks, the professor leaves the decision to continue up to him. With his sword in hand, he firmly states that he will continue the training. Full of determination, he simply asks them to start again. Just then, a woman arrives at the arena and orders him to stop. Seeing Professor Ariel, he just says her name, surprised by the interruption. Looking at the destroyed arena, she informs him that training is limited to 1 session per day. He then argues that his body is already healed and ready to continue. With a serious look, she explains that while physical wounds can be healed, there's another risk. She continues, saying that severe damage could affect his control over the sword. Prompting a flashback, she reminds him that he understands this better than anyone. Relieved by the rule, the professor says even he would hesitate to repeat the training. Looking at the debris on the ground, he says he understands the situation perfectly now. Then the young man asks why he's in such a hurry to get stronger. Stepping forward, the professor takes the blame for dragging him into this mess. She finishes by warning that now, his enemies could come for him at any moment. The professor adds that even by isolating him, he's not sure he can fully protect him. She then states that getting stronger is the only way and apologizes. He tells her not to worry, reassuring her with a wave of his hand. With great determination, he says he'll put a stop to this, no matter the cost. Seeing his resolve, she says she'll help him use his full power. Realizing her intention, the professor comments that she already has a plan. He then asks if the young man has forgotten the fastest way to get stronger. With a focused look, he already knows exactly what the best solution is. Completely confused, he stands in the middle of the arena, not understanding their conversation. The professor then reveals that the fastest solution is simply to get a new sword. Not understanding the logic, he says the Academy's sword is a great weapon. She explains that the weapon is good, but it can't handle his power. Looking at his reflection in the blade, he agrees that a common weapon wouldn't be able to handle it. Showing him a key, she invites him to her personal vault. The professor then asks if she's really going to give him one of those weapons. Saying it's fine, she simply materializes a key in her hand. An intense light then fills the entire training arena. With a surprised expression, he hears that he earned this right on his own merit. Standing in front of a portal, she then calls for him to join her. Standing before the portal, he prepares to enter the new location. Seeing the inside, he's completely surprised by what he's just found. Countless gold coins and treasures are scattered throughout the vast place. Upon entering the vault, they walk down a hallway filled with countless riches. She then wonders where the sword section is, immediately pointing it out. Walking down the hall, he observes the size of the place with great admiration. Arriving at the spot, the professor explains that the idea is to find a sword. Impressed by the weapons, he comments that they all look too dangerous to use. She then comments that it's really hard to decide with so many options available. Because of his power, she warns him that he can only test one sword. To begin the tests, he picks up the sword considered the sharpest of them all. Holding the new weapon, he comments that it feels pretty heavy. She agrees, but adds that the sword at least cuts very well. Pointing to a stone pillar, she tells him to test it there. With his stance ready, he says he's going to test the new equipment now. With a single strike, he cuts through the stone pillar without any difficulty. After the cut, the sword is embedded in the stone, showcasing all its power. With a smile, he says the new sword he tested is incredible. She then comments that the sword is too heavy for a real fight. The professor then says there's no harm in having a weapon like that. He continues, saying it could be useful against large, tough enemies. She then offers him a magic bag to store the sword without any trouble. Surprised, he asks if a sword like that can be borrowed so easily. She replies that it's better for the sword to be used by someone useful. Looking at him, she reminds him that he will face the true enemy. After the warning, he remembers a very difficult moment from his past. Switching to a flashback, he remembers that being there made no difference. Back then, despite all his effort, he couldn't do anything. He still remembers training so hard, but failing anyway. Back in the present, he thanks her for letting him use the sword. When he's warned not to show the sword to anyone, he immediately asks why. The professor then explains that the weapon is worth at least 10 billion coins. Completely shocked, he yells out the sword's value, not believing what he heard. Desperate, he tries to return it, but she warns him she won't accept returns. She then explains she's giving him the sword since she has no proper use for it. Not understanding at all, he asks if she's kidding, but she immediately denies it, saying she'd gladly do it. She calls the sword an overdue reward. Still very hesitant, he tries to argue, but is interrupted once again. With an intense look, she asks if his position isn't worth the money. Holding the sword tightly, he finally accepts the gift and thanks her. Wielding the new weapon, he promises he'll take very good care of the sword. Satisfied with his answer, she just smiles and says it's all right now. She then says they need something more common for day-to-day battles. He then comments that he didn't expect such an impressive treasure from the professor. The professor then says that no one in the world has an eye like hers. He explains that with her eye, she can easily make as much money as she wants. Turning to Heathcote, she asks for his opinion as a combat instructor. Thinking for a moment, he analyzes the options before giving his answer. He then points to one of the swords, suggesting which one would be best. Picking up the sword, he asks if he can test it, and she quickly agrees. With a single movement, he tests the weight of the new sword he picked up. Making an arc in the air, he continues to test the weapon with another swing. Executing a sequence, he tests the sword with several fast, precise movements. Stopping his movement, he analyzes the sword, saying it's not bad. Even so, he comments that something feels a little off about that weapon. Watching the test, the professor says the sword doesn't seem to suit him, so he thinks for a bit, and soon suggests another option. Showing another weapon, he says it was made for experiments, but it might work. Turning to the wall, he stares at the newly recommended sword. He stands still, just observing the weapon hanging in front of him. Displayed on the wall, the new sword has a very different look from the others. Following the professor's suggestion, he steps closer to hold the new sword. He inspects the weapon closely, preparing for the first curious test. Holding the sword, he remarks in surprise that it's very light. Running his finger along the blade, he realizes the sword has no edge. The professor explains that it was made for experiments and could be a good match for him. When he questions the choice, he's told that his power would shatter any ordinary sword. As the professor continues to explain, he watches the boy's reaction closely. He also warns that, in time, even the swords from here would slow him down. He considers this, thinking that a dull sword would be the best option. Placing his hand on the weapon, he considers his master's suggestion. To prove his point, the professor strikes a pillar with an identical sword. The metal pillar then shatters from the impact of the blow. Immediately after, the pillar's material begins to regenerate all by itself. Completely impressed, he says, "That's incredible," while she remains silent. Saying she prefers a normal sword, she agrees to at least try the idea. She asks if he wants to test other weapons, offering to show him other sections. Despite the offer, he keeps looking down the hall of swords with interest. Scanning the walls, he notes the wide variety of blades on display. Then he says he just wants to take a look at the swords there. His gaze fixes on a sword that seems lighter and stronger. He decides to test it and begins to walk toward the weapon. As he walks down the hall, he gets closer to where the sword is. But on the way, another sword on the wall catches his full attention. Feeling something strange, he wonders if he's seen that sword before. Turning to the professor, he asks about the sword he just saw. She then explains that the weapon was left behind by a former student of hers. He asks to test it, and she immediately agrees. Taking the sword from its stand, he holds it in his hands for the first time. With the weapon in hand, he feels it's a perfect fit for him. Standing in front of a dummy, he prepares to test the new sword. With a precise strike, he effortlessly cuts the training dummy in half. Seeing the result, the two instructors watch the scene closely. With a smile, he comments that the new sword is a perfect fit. He continues, saying it feels like he's trained with that weapon his whole life. When the professor asks, he immediately confirms he loves the new sword. With a confident smile, he states he's never wielded a sword that felt so natural. Then she informs him they need to test the weapon's compatibility with his power. Worried about the test, he asks what would happen if he ended up breaking the weapon. She tells him not to worry, saying the sword would be glad to be put to use. Touching the blade, he agrees with her. Asking about its creator, he hears that his name is Metallum Norum. Upon hearing the name, he's shocked by the incredible revelation about the sword. The sword in his hands was made by the world's greatest blacksmith, Metallum Norum. Now in the testing arena, she announces that the real training is about to begin. Instructed to push the weapon to its limits, he simply agrees to begin. With a smile, she tells them to start the test with the first sword. She then announces they will first test the most common sword they have. Walking to the arena, he prepares for the first test with the weapon. Closing his eyes, he concentrates to release his power into the sword. He then opens his eyes, ready to start the test with the weapon. But to his surprise, absolutely nothing happens when he tries to use his energy. Apologizing, he grips the sword and says he'll try again. Trying once more, he focuses on pouring his power into the blade. Even after concentrating, his power fails to manifest in the sword. Looking at the weapon, he realizes his power simply isn't activating. When asked by the professor, he confirms that he feels no difference in his body. Suggesting the sword is the problem, she says they should try a different one. She continues, saying the weapon might not work with his special powers. Taking out her magic bag, she decides to test the most common sword of the batch. Pulling the sword from the bag, she tells him to test the new weapon. Holding the new sword, he faces the training dummies in front of him. Then he concentrates and begins to channel his power into the sword again. With his power activated, he gets ready to start his attack in the arena. As he focuses, he realizes he still has a little time left. Suddenly, he wonders if he just heard a voice in his head. From a distance, the professor says activating the power shouldn't be a problem. With his energy activated, he announces he's ready and is going to start his attack. Charging forward, he strikes one of the dummies with a powerful blow. After attacking, he notices the power feels the same as before. With a perfect strike, he slices the dummy in half, feeling the difference. He realizes his body feels light, much more agile in combat. With swift movements, he destroys several targets in a single sequence of strikes. His slashes tear through the targets, cutting through the metal with ease and precision. From a distance, the mages comment that he's fast but different from last time. Seen from above, he moves through the arena, leaving a trail of destruction. Moving through the air, he says he feels like he's flying now. Finishing the attack, the head of one of the dummies falls to the ground. His body injured, he struggles to stay on his feet after the training. His body is covered in wounds, but he holds his ground in the arena. Panting, he wonders if there are any targets left to destroy. He then notices the number of targets was the same as before. Remembering the training, he realizes he managed to clear all the targets this time. From afar, the professor calls out to him, observing the completely destroyed arena. In shock, the instructors ask how he's still standing. Not understanding the question, he just stands there, confused by their reaction. Suddenly, a huge gash opens on his chest, gushing blood. The wound splits open, revealing the damage the power has inflicted on his body. Desperate, the professor shouts for him to drop the sword immediately. At her command, the sword falls to the ground with a metallic clang. Without the sword, he collapses to his knees, coughing up a lot of blood. Rushing to help, the healer tries to stabilize the young man on the ground. With a hand on the ground, the professor also kneels to support the student. Trying to get up, he says his strength is slowly fading. Supported by the professor, he apologizes for not being able to handle it. She then tells him to rest, as he lost a lot of blood during training. The professor says he broke a limit and that it's a good sign. Then the female professor scolds him, saying that fighting without realizing his condition is dangerous. Holding the sword, she prepares to analyze the weapon's condition up close. Looking at the reflection, she notices the sword doesn't have a single scratch. Her reflection on the blade shows that the weapon is completely intact. Analyzing the sword, she wonders if its glow has gotten a little stronger. An intense light then runs along the entire blade of the sword she's holding. Suddenly, she feels something strange coming from the weapon, making making her take a step back. Not understanding her reaction, he asks what's wrong with the professor. Changing scenes. A massive explosion erupts at the top of the academy building. At the explosion, they look up, completely confused. Then the professor pulls him away, running from the falling debris. From a distance, the top of the academy building is seen completely destroyed by the attack. At that, the students start running in a panic, fleeing the falling rubble. Immediately, an order is given for all instructors to protect the students. Not understanding anything, he asks what just happened. Right after, the professor explains that the area houses the vault for hazardous materials. He confirms that the explosion was clearly an attack by someone. He adds that he saw teleportation magic and suspects a theft. Meanwhile, other mages say it's impossible, explaining the vault's defenses. The professor then reveals there was energy from the blender mixed in the smoke from the explosion. She deduces they used the lab crystals to destroy all the defenses. Realizing the truth, he concludes that Varian's allies caused the explosion. Everyone then realizes they actually attacked the Academy headquarters. Drawing on the board, she explains that items were stolen from the Academy's vault. She notes that an outsider couldn't have caused that explosion alone. Plus, they managed to escape, which confirms one of her suspicions. Standing in front of the board, she declares it was an inside job. Hearing this, he says the organization can no longer be trusted. She then comments that maybe the Academy has always been this way. He refutes this, saying if that were the case, they could just take whatever they wanted. Agreeing with him, she understands the explosion had another important motive. She then states that the main culprit is definitely the blood drinker. Realizing they have the same enemy, he figures out they're at the academy too. Sitting in her chair, she warns him that he could become a target now. With a serious look, she advises him to keep his guard up at all times. Hearing her warning, he simply says he understands the gravity of the current situation. Sometime later, he's seen heading down the stairs to class. Arriving in the classroom, he joins the other students for another day of lessons. Watching a classmate, he notices the guy's tense expression. Seeing the mood in the room, he wonders if it's related to the explosion. Asking if something happened, he's told it's because of a notice. Remembering the notice, he says he does recall receiving something. When asked, he just says he read it, showing no concern. The mission is to march for 16 hours and camp in a dangerous area. His classmate then asks how he can be so calm about the situation. Panicking, the guy says that half the students drop out every year. He then comments that at least there's a time limit, which is generous. Flashing back, he remembers a training exercise with no time limit at all. Back then, he almost died after being attacked by monsters during training. Back in the present, he says that now there are teachers, so the risk is lower. Another classmate then says that hellish training doesn't seem to affect him anymore. With an awkward smile, he just laughs at the comment he received. Seeing the other's fear, he decides he must keep his strength up. From above, the academy walls are seen, securely surrounding the entire property. Then the teacher announces the start of the annual marching training for everyone. Warning them of the difficulty, he encourages everyone to persevere through the training. Passing through the walls, they arrive at a cliff overlooking the ocean. Looking at the horizon, he wonders who lives in such a deserted place. At the instructor's command, all the students begin to march out. Leaving the walls behind, they enter a dense, unknown forest. Leading the group, the teacher guides them through the thick woods. One of the students then says the teacher isn't following a trail. With a smile, the instructor says it wouldn't be training if it were easy. Seeing the difficulty, the students become desperate, not believing what they're hearing. Pushing forward, they continue the march through the dark and dangerous forest. Exhausted, one of the students asks how much longer they have to walk. The teacher then informs them that only 8 hours have passed since they started. Shocked, the students yell that they're still only halfway through the first day of training. The teacher then tells the student that his body will get used to it soon. Not believing him, the guy says the teacher is definitely lying to him. Then, other students comment that Leon doesn't seem tired at all yet. One of them then says that's to be expected from the best student of all. Watching him walk, another student notes that he hasn't lost his pace yet. Meanwhile, a girl complains that she's already tired of walking so much. Suddenly, she notices a strange movement coming from among the trees. With no time to react, she screams as she's attacked by a giant spider. In the blink of an eye, a dagger is thrown, hitting the spider dead on. Looking back, she sees it was the protagonist who saved her from danger. Thanking him, she's told she needs to be careful with the venomous insects. Watching the guy, one of the students notices he isn't just walking. He wonders how much training it takes to reach that level of preparedness. As he walks, the young man thinks that his training is paying off now. Compared to the past, he says just being able to sleep is a huge improvement. More than the fatigue, something else is starting to worry him. Remembering the warning, the teacher had alerted him to keep his guard up outside the academy. Being in an open area, he realizes the location's security is minimal. With the tension rising, he just clenches his fist tightly and discreetly. Continuing on with the group, he stays alert for any danger. Suddenly, one of the instructors shouts for everyone to halt the march. Tired, One of the students asks what's going on and why they've stopped. With a smile, the instructor announces it's time for a new activity. He then announces they'll be doing a meal training exercise. Confused, the students just stand there staring at the instructor. One of the students starts shouting with joy at the news. All the students celebrate, thinking they're finally getting a big feast. Seeing the celebration, the two friends yell that they'll finally get a well-deserved break. Suspicious, the young man realizes the name of the training is a bad sign. The instructor then asks what they're all talking about, not understanding the commotion. He then reveals that they'll have to cook their own food. Seeing everyone's despair, the instructor explains that he has divided them into squads. Pointing his finger, he announces that each squad will get a cooking kit. Through a portal, the items for the training are summoned in front of everyone. Looking at the list, he notices he's been placed in a specific squad. Reading the board, he realizes he's been made the leader of Squad D. With this new responsibility, he wonders if he can be a good leader. His new teammates then comment that they're in his squad. Introducing themselves with a smile, they extend a hand for a first greeting. Shaking their hands, he's surprised by the group's friendly reception. One of the members asks if he's okay with being the group leader, to which the other replies that after the fight, no one would be a better leader. Arriving with the equipment, they ask him what he wants them to do. Seeing their change in attitude, he realizes the fight truly impressed everyone. With a relieved smile, he understands the academy is based on merit. Calling out to the instructor, a student points out there's no food in the supplies. Showing the kit, he says it only has a pot and a fire starter. The instructor then explains that on a real march, they would have nothing. Stunned, the students stand motionless, shocked by the harsh reality. Respectfully, a student tries to argue with the instructor about the situation. Lying on the ground, the student says it's hard to imagine marching without food. Agreeing, the instructor explains that only applies to planned missions. He continues, saying that emergencies can force them to march with no preparation at all. Besides, magic bags are rare, and not everyone has access to them. With a serious look, he asks if they want to die without being able to fight back. The instructor stares them down, hoping they understand the seriousness of the training. After the lecture, all the students fall silent, not daring to complain. Ashamed, the student who complained apologizes to the instructor for his attitude. He then realizes that magic bags are rarer than he thought. Looking at the students, the instructor says he has some good news for them. He then reveals he's going to remove the magic that was repelling the monsters. With this revelation, he tells them they won't have to worry about finding food. Snapping his fingers, he releases the magic that was protecting all the students. With the barrier gone, the students brace themselves for the dangers of the forest. Watching the instructors leave, the students are left alone and scared. Being called leader, he's asked what they should do now. With a tired sigh, he says their only option is to hunt monsters and eat. Analyzing the tracks, he says the forest has small to medium-sized monsters. He continues, saying they should be able to handle them with swords. Seeing the tense group, one of the female students asks if it won't be hard to find monsters. He then suggests they act as bait to lure in the carnivorous monsters. Saying they need to get moving, he warns that other groups might compete for the food. With a smirk, he suggests they could also eat insects and snakes. Desperate, one of the female students shouts she'd rather hunt monsters any day. Stating that he's the leader, the group agrees to follow his decision. One member says that if Gray said it, it's the right move. Finding a good spot, the group hides behind a tree and waits. Crouching on the ground, he begins to carefully analyze the terrain. Giving a signal for silence, he warns that the monsters are approaching. Confused, his companions just watch him, waiting for his orders. Coming from the woods, a strange noise makes the entire group freeze. With wide eyes, one of the students is completely paralyzed with fear. Roaring loudly, a giant creature leaps towards one of the students. Screaming her friend's name, a girl watches the creature charge toward him. Unable to react, the young man freezes in fear before the monster. Seeing the creature, he realizes it's much faster than he expected, but before he can even think, his body moves on its own to dodge the attack. He realizes his body is moving on pure survival instinct. Remembering his training, he prepares to face the creature head-on. With his sword raised, he yells for the monster not to underestimate him. Then he lunges forward, landing a powerful blow right on the creature's head. With a smile, he celebrates landing the hit, thinking everything is fine. Suddenly, he sees the reflection of another monster coming at him. With no time to react, blood splatters everywhere from the new attack. He's thrown to the ground, sent flying by the second monster's strike. Seeing his companion in danger, the protagonist shouts his name in complete shock. With a hand on the ground, he prepares to jump into battle to help. Roaring in pain, the first monster is struck by a sword right in the eye. Falling backward, the second monster hits the ground with a heavy thud. Seeing the monster down, he readies himself for the next attack, completely focused. With a final blow, he defeats both creatures with his special sword. Lying on the ground, the young man sees the sword stuck in the ground in front of him, shocked. Seeing their friend on the ground, the other two stand frozen, just watching. Wiping his sword, he comments that the creature's bones are quite tough. Extending a hand, he asks his friend if he's okay after the attack. He then warns him that wild monsters keep moving even after being injured. Awkwardly, the young man says he learned his lesson the hard way. Looking at the creatures, he remarks that it's different from training against people. With the fire already lit, they begin to cook the monster's meat. Eating the meat, one of them says the taste is surprisingly good. The young man then explains that it's important to research the list of local monsters. One of the girls thanks him, impressed by his survival knowledge. With an awkward smile, he just says he studied a little a long time ago. Trying to explain himself, he says he's not as experienced as he seems. Suddenly, another group approaches their campfire, asking for some food. With a dirty face, the boy says their own food didn't turn out so well. Asking if the group minds, he offers them a piece of meat. Overjoyed, the boy is about to take the food when he's interrupted. Appearing out of nowhere, the professor forbids any food trading between squads. After the scolding, all the students fall silent, unsure of what to do. Sometime later, they continue their march, moving forward through the forest. Reaching a clearing, the professor announces they will be camping there for the night. As the camp is announced, the students collapse to the ground, exhausted from the long walk. Even though he's exhausted, one of the students says at least they got to eat well. Lying on the grass, they wonder if they'll have to gather food again. The professor then explains that he has prepared potions and tents for each of them. He also warns that he will be simulating surprise attacks throughout the night. Seeing the designated spots, one of the students complains that they still have to walk more. With a serious look, the professor warns that he can hear what they're saying. He adds that they were separated on purpose so they wouldn't get too relaxed during training. Without further ado, the professor announces that their training begins right now. Telling them to hurry, he says the longer they take, the less they'll sleep. Back at the camp, they discuss how many people should stand watch at night. They all agree they want to sleep as much as possible to recover their energy. So, they decide that just one person per shift will be enough to keep watch. They start to argue about the order of the shifts, everyone wanting the easiest ones. To help the group, he offers to take the second watch of the night. With the second shift taken, another volunteers for the third, thanking the first guy. With a smile, he thanks his teammate for helping out with the watch. With the order set, he tells everyone to wake up the next person before they go to sleep. Taking the first shift, one of the female students sits by the campfire. Meanwhile, the young man is fast asleep, resting in his camping tent. With everyone else asleep, he uses his turn to rest and recover his energy. Suddenly, a mysterious figure approaches the camp in the middle of the night. Drawing a dagger, the mysterious person prepares to attack the camp.